right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to Honest Defense. Today, I have the honor of being joined by Mary Dague. Mary is a former Army explosive ordnance technician. In 2007, when Mary was in Iraq, she and her team recovered an IED. The bomb exploded, causing Mary to lose both of her arms. On a lighter note, she also had a star turn as Mary Dague in the Oscar-nominated film Range 15. It's one of my all-time favorites. And just to give people an idea of Mary's sense of humor, on November 4th, she tweeted, "On this day, 13 years ago, I didn't die. Suck it, terrorists." Mary, congratulations on your survival day. Happy belated Veterans Day. And thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, and happy belated Veterans Day to you too.
I didn't serve, but I'll pass it on to my dad and my brother.
Oh shit, my bad. I assumed that's my bad.
No, I'm honored. So, Mary, I always like to kind of start with how people grew up. I'm always curious, kind of your background. Did you come from a military family yourself?
Kind of. My dad he served in Vietnam, but that's like way before my time. But he never talked about it. But we did grow up with a very healthy respect for the military. Um, but dad was a cop, mom was a nurse. Grew up in a small town in Montana. So we didn't have a whole lot of exposure to the military, but it was something that everybody kind of almost revered or at least respected.
Yeah.
But yeah, just my dad, my grandpa too. But again, he never talked about it. Like my dad didn't tell me anything about Vietnam or serving until after I came home on mid-tour leave.
Wow.
And we sat down and this salty old guy. Oh my God. He poured me wild turkey on the rocks and was like, "Here, now we can have a proper drink." And I was like, "I'm not ready."
I was ready to go overseas. I wasn't ready for this.
I thought I could do it. That first sip, I was like, "I'm gonna die."
Right.
Now I go out.
It seems like that was a common thing for people in Vietnam, and I'm sure earlier generations that they just didn't really talk about it. Do you, I don't. It seems like with people who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan, kind of our generation, people are more willing and open to talk about that. Is that something? Do you think that's kind of helps kind of, I guess, healing from whatever trauma you had over there, is being more open about it?
Oh, absolutely. Especially there's a book called Achilles in Vietnam that really accurately describes the effects of PTSD and what they called shell shock at the time.
Right.
But like even the American Psychological Association didn't even recognize PTSD as an actual disorder until like the 80s, I think.
Right.
But people, the men and women coming back were very much in a don't talk about it. It's shameful or weak.
Right.
If you can't handle it. And now we still have that today a little bit. It seems prevalent when you're in the thick of it. But we're starting to grow out of that, where we're starting to realize that mental health is absolutely key, especially in sustaining a long time war.
Right.
So people are learning to be more open and honest and accepting of the things they've had to go through, the things they've seen, the challenges they faced, or even the fact that some of them haven't and they feel like they should have.
Right.
But in, coming back from Vietnam, I don't envy the veterans from that war. They were not treated well.
Right.
They were all treated, or they were treated as though they were all war criminals, or all had done heinous things over there when, some were just cooks.
Right.
Like my dad was a fixed wing mechanic. He wasn't out in the thick of it,
Yeah, that seems like at least one thing that we took out of that war. We said we're not going to ever treat our veterans like that again. We are able to separate the policies that the civilian leaderships in Washington create and the 19, 20-year-olds who are actually going and fighting those wars.
And that's something that's good. It's something we've grown grown, I think, because of this war. And this war was a lot easier for American society and even just allied societies to accept that we were going to war because we were attacked. So joining became, a selfless duty rather than a requirement by the government. And seeing people do that, you started to revere them as heroes because it was real brutal in the first couple of years of the war. So people joining during wartime, you got thanked instead of, considered that you're going to war, you're going to do awful shit. It's just because you want to kill.
Right. Did 9/11 have an effect? I'm not going to ask you your age, but you're roughly my age, and so we were young when 9/11 happened. But did that have any kind of effect on you?
Oh yeah. Especially because that around that time we were a country at peace. We've been at peace for a real long time. Um, Especially, I was a teenager. I think I was a junior in high school. No, I was. My friend, like my best friend, we we practically lived together. Her dad was supposed to be in one of the twin towers,
Wow.
and we didn't even find out that he was alive until later on that day. It was like 6, 7 at night when we finally got the call that he was alive. He was late for his meeting. It's the only reason. Um,
Wow.
but I remember it vividly. I was running late for school, and I got in my car, and this is back in the days of CDs, and I forgot to grab a CD, and so I was like, whatever, and I just put on the radio, and the first thing I heard was, "Are we going to war?" And I was like, "What is this, like a 1984? Like they're doing a spoken word, reading a book to me or something?" And then they start
Right.
talking about one of the towers has been hit, and we're like, "What?" And got to class. We're in homeroom, and the school shut down like immediately. They just started wheeling TVs in, and we were all sitting there watching. We watched as the second plane hit, and it was like, "Is this real life?
Yeah.
What's going on?" And then the one at the Pentagon, we were reading reports on that, like the Pentagon's getting attacked. Like, what is going on? It was really scary as a kid.
Yeah.
Um, and then you've got the country reacts, and in a display of unity that has since never been seen. Um, and you felt a real camaraderie with just your fellow American. It didn't matter what they looked like, where they lived. We were all attacked.
Yeah.
And we all kind of came together. It was amazing. But it was still very much, even as a kid, I felt an affront. Like, how dare you? you
Yep.
know? um, and I wanted to join the military before that. I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly fighter jets. And I planned on doing the Navy. And then after that, just everything changed. And of course, I went through being a teenager and an idiot and hormones. And so my perception of everything changed a few times before I actually joined the Army. But it very much played into why I joined.
So
I
that
I wanted to be, and I figured at
right.
least I could help out with that while I was figuring out what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So that was always the plan. Was right after high school, you were going to join.
No, actually, I was going to go to college at first. I got offered a scholarship, but I got engaged, and I figured I'd wait a year, and we were going to get married. And then his mom, who I have nothing but respect and admiration for, who helped raise 12 kids, and then they had 14 kids. She one day was like, "Don't worry, I'll train you to be the perfect housewife." And I was like, "Oh, what a nightmare. I'm gonna go to war."
Yeah. War sounds better, huh?
Yeah, that's so much responsibility.
Right.
I think I'll be on the bomb squad.
Right. Is that so? Why did you pick that to be a bomb specialist? I mean, what was your MOS?
It was 89 Delta at the time. Well, actually, at the time, I think it was 55 Delta. It's changed twice.
Okay.
But EOD, I initially actually went go into MP or military intelligence, because Dad was a cop, and when I was gonna get out, I was kind of focusing on forensics and investigations, and I was thinking I wanted to go into homicide, be a detective. And I was like, well, if I go into military intelligence or MP, it'll translate. I was wrong; it wouldn't, but I thought it would.
Right. We all have these wild ideas of what career path we should be doing, what can lead to what, and then you actually end up doing. You're like, oh shit, that didn't
Right.
play out at all as I thought it was expected to.
That's nothing like I thought it was gonna
Right.
be. Shit. But yeah, when I got to MEPS, they actually didn't have any slots for females for MP or military intelligence. And I actually remember thinking, because I was 19, and I remember going like, what the fuck does my plumbing matter?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Job.
Right, I didn't realize. So there's a quota. There's a certain percentage of women they put in each job.
Yeah, and I was like, those were my only two. So
Yeah.
then they're like, well, what else do you want to do? Because I scored fairly high on the ASVAB, and I'm like, well, what else you got? Because that was my plan and my backup.
Right.
And so they started reading down the list. And at one of them, they were like, petroleum supply specialist. I'm like, I'm not pumping gas for you, dude. I don't care how you church it up.
Petroleum supply specialist. I like that.
Like, that sounds real fancy.
You're a specialist. Yeah, right.
And they got to explosive ordnance disposal. And I was like, what's that? Like the bomb squad? And the guy gets all uppity with me. He's like, no, it's explosive ordnance disposal. It's the fucking bomb squad.
Right.
Like, come on, man. But when he said it, like there were a bunch of other recruiters in the office, not even mine, just a bunch of other ones, even all different branches. And every single one of them jumped up and they're like, take it. I'm like, I don't know, you got a movie or something I could watch about it?
A little literature that at least give me a paragraph about what this actually is.
Yeah, so they sat me in a back room. I watched the recruiting video for it, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, I could do this. This looks interesting.
Right.
I was really into science, and it seemed like it would change, so I wouldn't get bored, and that's a big problem with me.
I know the feeling.
like if you lose my interest, I'm just walking away. I'm like,
right,
man, I'm done. But yeah, it looked awesome. And so they came in with the security packets and they're like, well, fill these out. And so I spent the next 2.5 hours filling out security packets. I was the last one at MEPS when they were done. And I called my dad and was like, hey, Dad, I got my job. He's like, oh, did you get MP? I'm like, no, they didn't have a slot. Like, oh, so you went military intelligence? I'm like, they didn't have a slot for that either. And he's like, so what'd you get? And I was like, explosive ordnance disposal. It's and he goes, I know what it is. Don't tell your mother. I'm like, okay.
When you say you were filling out those security packets, was that like, did you need was that for like a certain level of clearance or what was those extra? Okay.
You have to have a top secret security clearance to go into EOD. If you don't get your clearance by the time you graduate EOD school, you don't get a badge. You reclass. Wow.
I get, is that because you're exposed to all this advanced technology and they don't want you divulging that stuff?
Yep.
Okay.
Very
okay.
So
from there, I want to hear about what the school that you had to go to for that.
It's changed since I was in, because many moons ago. But sorry, fuel. When I went, phase 1 for the Army was at Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. So you went to basic training, and then it was supposed to be a 7 to 9 week course in Alabama, where you do like a basic electronics course and then ordnance ID and things like that. And it's kind of a weeding out process in phase 1. At the time, like it was one of those, you sit down in a room with a giant U-shaped table and they're like, look to your left, look to your right. 2 of those people won't be here at the end of this.
Yeah.
But it was intense. Like you have to have an 85 to pass a test. You get an 84, you fail a test. There's no like you get an A or a B. 84, you fail.
Okay.
And you get 1 retest. If you fail that, you roll back into the class behind you. You try again. You fail that, you go to an academic review board. They determine whether you stay or not and get another chance. If you stay in, your next test is what we call a do or die. You don't get a retest. You either pass or you're out of the school.
And what's on these tests? Is it just a written test? Or do you study for it?
Sometimes, you study as much as you can. Phase 1 wasn't strictly classified, so you could study to a point. But when I was in, there was no bringing study materials home. You got a 2-hour study hall every day, and that's it.
Okay.
So you really utilize your time. There were written and practical tests. I do fairly the same at both. Like if you don't tell me I'm being tested, I'm probably going to knock it out of the park. But the minute you're like, this is a test, I'm like, oh, fuck.
Right.
Start to second guess myself. And you make like little mistakes. Like one test I failed because I transposed 2 numbers on the fuse ID. And like the instructor came in, he was like, Dague, what's the fuse nomenclature? And I was like, Mark 86. And he was like, damn it. I'm like, what? He's like, you wrote 68. I'm like, son of a bitch, but I failed because I wrote it wrong.
Right. Well, I guess in practice you can't get that wrong, right?
Yeah, no, you have to. It's very much to teach you attention to detail.
Yeah.
because like you hand that to somebody in the field and they go into the pubs and pull up the wrong fuse. Like,
Right.
what is this?
Right.
So it is incredibly important. But at the same time, it's you tend to think of it as being tedious. Like you knew what I meant,
Right.
but what if they didn't?
Doesn't matter. Right.
Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
But I was gonna say like phase one for every branch is different. Air Force goes to Lackland, I think. Navy, they go through like dive school and uh, their boot first. Marines have to actually have an MOS before they go EOD.
Okay.
So at least at the time, I don't know how it is now, but Marines were all reclass. And then after the what's supposed to be 7 to 9 weeks, I was there for a little longer. I failed the one test, and then after that, I passed them all, but I got run over by a taxi and tore my Achilles tendon.
Oh, jeez.
So, I was there on med hold for like 7 months.
That was like it was portending the future to come for you, I guess, huh?
Oh, I'm a huge klutz. Bomb squad was probably a bad plan.
Oh, that's horrible. What was it? Just you were crossing the street and it didn't see you?
I was getting in and the dude started going and parked on my foot. And I was like, dude, stop. And so he stops. And he's like, are you getting in? I was like, you got to put your cab in reverse. And he's like, what? I'm like, you parked on my fucking leg.
Oh, God.
Like, oh my God. He's like, do you want to go to a hospital? I'm like, no, I want to go to the party and drink beer.
I can numb the pain. I'll be fine.
Right? Well, I thought I just sprained it. And
Yeah.
then by the end of the weekend, I couldn't walk and it was all
Yeah.
swollen. I was like, maybe I should go in. And so I went to sick call and they're like, they did an x-ray and they put it up and the doctor looks at me. He's like, you see this star chart? I'm like, yeah. He goes, that's your Achilles tendon. It shouldn't look like a star chart. I'm like, oh. So what do I do? He's like, just an air boot until it heals.
Wow.
And steroids. I'm like, oh, that's great. So I'm gonna get fat and can't work out. Awesome.
Great. And I'm in the Army, right? So what were you? So were you still like going through the school after that happened? Okay.
To a point, like I had finished.
Okay.
After a certain point, and I was just on a med hold.
Okay.
And then of course you get a lot of like nicknames like, oh, you're a sick call ranger. I was going in every week because I had follow-ups and occupational therapy.
Right.
Like, oh, she's a sick call ranger. I'm like, fuck you guys, I run a 1340.
Still run half of you down.
Right. So yeah, at the end of it, I had to my drill sergeant was amazing. And he was like, Dague, you have to max your PT test. He's like, you've been on sick, on a profile for long enough that if you don't max it, they're just going to put you out anyway.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And so he worked with me every day, after occupational therapy, because I was in a holding pattern. I wasn't going to class. And so he worked with me every day to keep me in shape so that once the PT test did, I could max it.
And did you?
Oh yeah. That was that was the best PT test I ever did.
Nice. What were the scores you needed to max?
Oh gosh.
You remember? I'm just curious. I don't remember what the women's scale was.
For I think it was like a 15-minute run, but that was the time that I did 1340.
Wow. 2 miles.
Yeah. 2 miles. And I crushed it. And then after that, every time I was like, I could do this. And I was like, 16 minutes, I'm gonna fucking die. But the push-ups, I believe, to max was like 69, 68, something like that.
We'll go with 69.
Yeah, good number. And sit-ups was, I want to say 80 or 85.
Okay.
But I never had problem with sit-ups. And push-ups, basically, I had been training for so long on one foot that I'd been doing, 1 foot push-ups just as an everyday thing because it was one of the workouts I could do.
Wow.
So I crushed the push-ups.
Yeah.
And the run was the thing I was the most worried about, but it was because of that I worked the hardest on it. And then after that, I was like, oh, I'm good. I'm never running again.
Until the next PT test.
Yeah.
So you graduate EOD school. And so had you already gone through basic at that point?
Yeah, so you go through basic. So you got your 9 weeks, and I went to Fort Leonard Wood for that, and then did phase one in Redstone Arsenal, and then after that, you all four branches go to Eglin Air Force Base for phase
Okay.
two of EOD school, and that's the main schoolhouse. You all of you train together, but graduation still, you might roll out of your class, you might go into another class. Or you might get put on a academic hold or a security hold where you're waiting to get your security clearance. My security clearance went through in phase one, probably because I was there for so long.
It had time to really run its course. That ACL tear paid off, huh?
Right.
So from there, where do you go after phase
um,
two?
After phase two, you go to your units. So I went to the 707th in Fort Lewis, Washington, which is now Joint Base Lewis McChord because it's a Air Force and Army base. They've
Right.
combined. But when I got to the unit, it was only a 13-man unit, and I was the first female they ever had, and it was a little bit weird. Like I knew I was going to be the only female. They
Right.
warned me, but I wasn't like, oh my god, what if like what if they treat me bad? Like it was never that. I was just like,
Yeah.
oh okay, cool. And I got there, and the commander, you go in your first day, you meet your command element first. So the commander pulls me in his office, and he's like, well, you're the first female, and I just want you to know we're taking this very seriously. And I'm like, apparently more seriously than I am.
Right.
But he was
That
like,
always makes it more weird when they have to like overemphasize the fact that you're different. Like just be normal. That's all I want.
yeah, like just treat me like another soldier. That's why
Right.
I'm here. But he was like, there's no more grab ass. We're not gonna tell any sexist jokes, no more swearing. I'm like, sir, please stop. Please don't do this.
Right.
Like I'm already invading their space. This is already gonna be a transition. Let's not make this worse.
Right.
And he just, nope, it's not gonna happen on my watch. And he goes out there, and they have an end of the day meeting. So all of them are standing around. I'm like, hey, hi, I'm Mary. And like everybody goes by like nicknames or first names unless an outsider comes in.
Right.
Um, and then of course, Sergeant Slavinsky or Specialist Dague.
Right.
But, just like, oh hey, hi, I'm Mary. What's up? And they're like, oh hey, Mary. And then the commander is like, all right, there's gonna be no more sexism, no more this, no more swearing. And I'm like, and they're all staring daggers at me.
Right. Because guys are like, fuck. Now that means no fun. Now that you're saying.
Right?
Right.
Like, oh, the end of the fun is here.
Right.
West
Right.
Clinton. And so like I ended up overcompensating by being just completely vulgar and crap
Right.
and telling just the worst jokes. Like, guys, please, like this is him. This isn't me. This is him thinking I want this. I don't want this. Like
Right.
I just
Right.
want you guys to work with me, and I work with you, and we all do our fucking jobs and get along.
Right.
Like
And from there, I'm sure it was good, right? Once
oh yeah.
once they realize, okay, you're not this special snowflake that we have to look out
Right.
for.
Like we did some trainings, and you'd have to like put your name on tape on the back of like your chem suit or something, and I would just put the vag. Like, anything like send in the vag.
It does. When you put it that way, it actually does sound pretty intimidating.
Right. But it was one of those things, like it was a choice I made to make the guys feel more comfortable. Like we're gonna have to work in close quarters. Like yeah, we're gonna fight, we're gonna bicker. It's like any close unit. You're gonna bicker because you get into this like brotherly kind of pattern. You're working together every day. You're in very intense and stressful situations. You're all dealing with shit in different ways, and you have to get to know each other. But at some level, you become really intimate with each other's reactions, and like you can read each other's faces. You know who's going to get pissed off before words even come out. Like,
Right.
But you have to in our job, because you have to be able to silently communicate. And
Yeah.
so what the commander was trying to do is actually counterintuitive to us working together in that capacity, because it would just put up a wall between us. Like, oh, I can't say this, it's going to piss off the girl.
Right, right. Well, that's such a good point. It's like, yeah, it's like they have to be able to be comfortable doing whatever they would normally do around you, because otherwise, yeah, when you're in the heat of battle, you can't be thinking, oh, I was going to do this, but we have a girl here, so now we have to do something different, and that's how you get everyone killed.
Exactly.
That split second of thinking of oh, I got to do something different.
Yep.
Wow.
And to my team's credit, my medics' credit, when shit hit the fan, they didn't think twice. There was one kid. I should get to that later and tell you other stories to tell that story.
Okay, we'll get there. We'll get there. So you're with your unit now. You're training. We're already in Iraq at this point. So you guys know, like, you're either going probably Iraq or Afghanistan, right? At some point soon.
We knew pretty early on that we were going to go to Iraq. Okay. Our unit was one of the ones that was bulking up to go to Iraq to sustain a year-long deployment rather than a 6-month. Because at the time, it was just legacy companies that were deploying for 6 months at a time.
Right.
And the reason for that was it's an incredibly stressful and intense job, but it's also one that once you develop a routine, it's easy to get complacent, and complacency kills in our job. So 6 months deployment is enough to get into a groove, to understand your TTPs, to get a good working relationship with whoever you're supporting, but not enough to just sit around like, it's fucking Wednesday.
Right.
Which keeps you on your toes. So we bulked up to a 44-man company leading up to the deployment, knowing that we were going to Iraq and we were going to be supporting first Cav. And like we each supported I think we had 4 teams supporting battalions, or 4 groups of teams supporting battalions. So my team and one other team, we supported all of 2-5 Cav and all their entire AO. I'm sorry, area of operations. I forget.
No, that's those military acronyms. You just start spin them out like they're words. We got a lot of civilians listening to this, so yeah, the more you can spell it out, the better.
But yeah, we knew where we were going. We knew what we were doing. I got married while at the unit before leaving to my best friend at the time. We started dating, but we were both deploying. Oddly enough, he was deploying with 2-5 Cav and I was deploying with 707th in support. Okay. But we also knew, like, the reason we got married was we started dating, but we knew that, if something happened to one of us, the Army doesn't give a shit if you're dating. They're not going to send you back to take care of them. You have to be married. Otherwise, it doesn't fucking count. So we got married in case something bad happened, and lo and behold. Spoiler alert.
How old were you?
Oh God, I was 22.
Wow.
It was the middle of my stupid years, maybe the peak of my stupid years.
That's everyone at 22, we're all idiots.
Yeah, we think we know everything, and we're goddamn invincible.
Yeah.
But
that's why you're the ones that fight the wars,
right? Well, and about a month after he deployed, and a month before I deployed, his little brother was killed in action. He was a Marine amphibious war vehicles. A rocket hit his vehicle. So my now ex-husband had to escort his brother's body home and do all the funerals and everything. So I was doing all that in the middle of pre-deployment training. Like I found out when we were at a pre-deployment course that Jesse had died. So I had to finish the course. I got to go to the funeral in Arlington, but that's all that I was allowed to take leave for.
Wow.
Because we had to train, to. And then we deployed. We got to Iraq on January 1st of 2007. And it wasn't something that, like, it impacted me. It sucked. It was terrible. It was painful, but at the same time, you have to learn to compartmentalize when shit like that happens, or more people die.
Yeah. That's what I've heard. I mean, hearing that from my dad and from other veterans I've talked to, they all say the same thing: is that when you're there, you just have to pretend like there's nothing, there's no one back home. You don't have a family because you have to focus 100% on the mission, and it sucks
Absolutely.
because you feel like you're abandoning your family when you're doing that, but you have no other option.
Right. Well, and people are like, "Oh, that's sociopathic." Like, no, it's a survival trait. It's
Right,
what we have to do to not only keep ourselves alive, but keep our team alive, and that's our
right.
whole mission. Like, and
So
it does. Like my dad understood, but for like the first month we were there, when I called back home, like, "Oh yeah, no, we're still setting up." We weren't. Within like 3 days, my team was operating, and a month later, my dad was like, "Mary, we didn't have half the shit that you had when we were in Vietnam, and we were set up faster. I know that you're running." I'm like, "Just don't tell mom. Give her some more comfort time."
right, right. I mean, that's amazing that at 22 you're able to realize, hey, I gotta ease mom into this.
Yeah.
So you
Well,
said you were at your peak of your stupidity, but I don't know. That takes a little bit of intelligence right there to do that.
that's just years of growing up with my mom and knowing the
Right.
storm that was impending.
So, like, what was your day to day? What was a typical mission that you guys were running?
Um, the way we ran, because we had the two teams supporting the battalion, we did what we called 3 days on, 3 days off. So for 3 days on, you are on response on call. So whatever 2-5 is out doing, they're doing their missions. We weren't really privy to that. They just, hey, we found an IED here. Like, all right, man, we're on our way. Um, the 3 days off, you were on planned ops, planned missions. They would do like cordon and knock, or they would take over certain areas, or you'd get a general that wants to go out and win hearts and minds. So they need a warm and fuzzy, have EOD
Right.
there in case you come upon something. Um, my team did most of the planned missions, and then response. Iraq in 2007 was real heavy. I was actually just talking to my team leader the other day. He came over to help me with a project, and we were talking about it. They did the numbers, and our team alone did something like 330 something uh, IEDs, incidents, and unexploded ordnance in just the year that I was there. Um, we had the most in the unit, and I'm pretty proud of that. But but it was still, that's not to knock the other guys and say that they had an easier time. It was real intense in 2007 for all of us.
Yeah. What was the general process for diffusing an ID? I mean, I don't want you to reveal anything classified, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about what did you guys actually do? Like, how did you, when you came across an ID, what were the steps that you took?
Oh, it's always different because it was like a big game of chess. They would watch us in what we were doing with our tactics and our procedures, and then they would adapt there. So we you tend to go in with nothing. Like you think of it as nothing, because if you go in with a plan and it's not what you thought it was, you're shifting on the fly. But you go in without expectations, and you can just adapt as you go, without having to be like, oh shit, I was prepared for this, but now we have to re-prepare.
Right.
And you really quickly we learned that you have certain things set up, like little charges just ready to go if you got to bip something. I'm sorry, blow in place. Uh, if you got to do that on the fly, you'll have charges that are pre-made, just because that's a pretty common thing for us.
Right.
Um, but for the most part, you're gonna drop the robot. It depends on when you get there, when it's in place. But you're gonna drop the robot, go up, do a quick recon, see what you're working with, check for booby traps or secondaries or anything, and then adapt your plan from there. Um, the biggest I guess tactic with EOD is being able to think outside the box and adapt on the fly. Um, you can never go in thinking that anything is going to fit into the rule book, because it probably won't. Um, and if you operate on the assumption that it's going to be like the last time, it's real likely to get you killed.
Yeah.
We had one for about 3 weeks. We had a series of IEDs that they were putting on in the road. They were digging a hole, putting it underneath, putting the pavement back on top of it. just to create a bigger explosion, more casualties. And for a while, we were going in and lifting them out of the ground and putting them in the truck, and then going to a safe disposal area and blowing them up there. And one night, we got called out. It was like 2 a.m, and we got called out on a blackout op. They found an IED, or they assumed it was, because there's a perfect square cut out of the road and then put back in, like subtle.
Right, it's out of Bugs Bunny.
Yeah. Just has a big Acme sign, bomb here.
Yeah.
But we got there, and Bruce got out to check it out. And he got back in, and I was like, hey man, I was like, maybe we tie a shovel to this one and tie a rope, put it to the truck, and I just back up. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I got a bad feeling about this one. And he's like, okay. And so puts the shovel in, tied the rope to the shovel and then to the truck, and I backed up. And as it pulled the IED out, it went off because it had an anti-lift switch, and they'd been watching us lift them out.
Oh wow.
And it was just, you had to change it up, or shit like that happened. If we hadn't done that, Bruce probably wouldn't be here.
Yeah. But no one got hurt from that one. Wow.
No, it's well, we had the JERV, which is the Joint EOD Rapid Response Vehicle. It's that big 6-wheeled vehicle with the V-shaped hull.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we were rocking. I mean, we're fine.
Yeah.
Like, we got blown up in that thing like 3 or 4 times, and every time it was like, what was that?
Did we hit a rabbit or something? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I got so mad at Mick one time. He was driving, my teammate. He was driving, and I was prepping a charge because we had a secondary that we got called for while we were out working on another IED. And so I'm making a charge, and I'm cutting through the C4 like on my leg as we're driving down the road, and he like hits a pothole, and I fly up and I come back down, and the knife goes through the C4 into my leg. And I'm like, God damn it, Mick. And he's like, what? I'm like, watch where you're fucking driving. Like, so mad. He's like, we just got blown up. And I'm like, oh, well, don't run over IEDs. God.
You idiot.
And Bruce is like, what's wrong? I'm like, I fucking stabbed myself. Like,
Oh God.
how bad? I'm like, it's not bad enough. Keep going. Fine. Like, just
So you just bandaged yourself up and kept going.
I didn't even bandage myself
Wow.
up. It was just like super glue through my pants.
Right. It's incredible. So the one that went wrong, walk me through that day. What again, was it just a kind of a regular another job?
Well, yeah, it was actually fairly regular, which is weird. So there was a children's school that First Cav had helped build there and maintain and keep the security of. They let little girls go to school. But on top of that, the Taliban just didn't want kids to go to school. They don't want you to have an education. If you have an education, you're a threat. You can question them.
We don't want that.
Yeah, they're dangerous.
Right.
So we were disarming IEDs in that school weekly.
Wow.
Like we even had the grid coordinate memorized. Like, you'd get the grid, like, it's at school.
Were they setting IEDs there? Were they trying to get the kids, or did they just know that you guys were watching the school and they wanted to get you?
Oh, I don't know if
or they just didn't care. They just wanted to blow people up.
They just wanted the school gone.
Yeah.
But they were also using it because they know that we've got the rules of engagement, but on the other side, we're all very, I mean, not all, but most of us are very compassionate when it comes to children. So across from this children's school was what we call the Taliban apartments, because they would put IEDs in the school. We would come to disarm them, and they would ambush us. It was,
Jeez.
I mean, it was like having lunch. We knew it was going to happen, like, every single time. Like, yep, we're going to get ambushed, so just button up. And we would go in, disarm them, destroy them. I don't think there was only one that we ever had to blow in place, and it was because we didn't know if it had been fired or not. And it being fired really dictates what we can do with it.
Right.
So other than that, we would try to disarm, because we don't want to, we're not going to do anything that's going to increase the risk of casualties ever. Our job first and foremost is to protect life. So we got called to the school, and they the Iraqi army had found it, and we told them to bring it to COP Constitution, which was attached to Liberty, they had a disposal area, and it's an Iraqi
Okay.
combat outpost. Sorry,
All right.
they have a disposal site. They can get on base. They can bring it there. We've brought ordnance there before. It's just where we go to blow shit up. Instead, they took it to the parking lot in between the children's school and the Taliban apartments, which to us, we're very much like, we're going to get ambushed. Because
Yeah.
as much as we're trying to ally with them, don't ever trust them. Like, you trust them, you will die.
But why would they want it? I mean, you would think that's their kids going to that school, right? Why would they?
Sometimes, but most of the time, they're being either paid or threatened to do it.
Wow.
Like you put this here and we'll give you, $1,000 or whatever, or you put this here, we'll kill your whole fucking family.
Yeah.
And
You don't really have a choice.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I feel for them, but at the same time, if an emplacer dies, they die.
Yeah.
That's one less IED out there to kill randos.
Right.
Because an explosive doesn't discriminate. They can if they have their finger on the trigger, but for the most part, they weren't. They're just putting it there and hoping for casualties. They didn't care who got hit.
Yeah.
So we get called out of the school. I was studying for the E5 board, and I'd been like locked in my room for 2 days, just hitting the books. And then one of my our transient teammates who was heading home on mid-tour leave was like, "Oh, I'll go in your place." And I was like, "No, man, I got to get out of this fucking pod. Like, I got to go do something." So we responded to it, and we had to drive in between the apartment buildings to get to it, because they put it in like a walled off part of the parking lot, which just made us feel even more like it was an ambush. Like, because you've got these like 6-story buildings all around you, and then the one part that's open is a children's school.
Yeah.
Like, so you're pretty well boxed in.
Were you in like a major city, or what was the kind of the surrounding area?
Not a major city. We were in Abu Ghraib.
Okay.
Real derelict, run down. There were buildings, apartments. There's a school. There were homes, but I wouldn't call it a city. Like, for us, it's like a small town.
Right.
And it only lasts for a few square miles before you're out just in the desert. So we got out, we got to it. The Iraqi army had already been just driving around with it in their fucking trunk, like you do. I don't know why they thought that was a good plan.
Wow.
But they put it in the middle of the parking lot, and so we pulled our vehicles up. I was driving. Mick was trunk monkey, which he sat in the back, did the charges and everything, and manned the gun. And then Bruce was a team leader, and obviously, like, I'm going to the sergeant's board. They're training me to be a team leader, so I'm doing a lot of on the job training. So Bruce would go down, do initial recon, or we'd send the robot, and he'd be like, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And I would run the incident after that. So we're parked, all the trucks are loud, and we're in an echo chamber because we're surrounded by buildings. So I'm sitting there watching Bruce, and he like flags me down, and I'm like, what? And then he's yelling something at me. So I took my earplugs out. I'm like, what? And he's like, bring me trash bags. I'm like, all right. And so I kept my earplugs out. I set them on the seat. I jumped down for whatever reason, which is, this is not something I ever did. And Bruce did it too. Like, neither of us, like, when we talk about it, neither of us know why the fuck we did this, but we left our doors open. We never do that. You always button up. I don't know why we did that. But left my earplugs on the seat, left the door open, ran to the back, grabbed a couple trash bags, walked down to Bruce. We started taking the homemade explosives, HME, out of the device. And they had cut down one of their light poles. For whatever reason, the light poles in Iraq are metal, and they're hollow. So they'd cut it down, put a base on it, filled it with explosives, put a blasting cap up through the bottom of the base, and then welded a lug nut into the bottom, which to me is ballsy as fuck.
Yeah.
Like,
that thing could have gone off right in their face, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if it's ballsy or dumb. Both.
It can very easily be both. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get down there. and we just start taking handfuls of the explosive out and putting it in the trash bag. Because we couldn't get the lug nut off the bottom. We had to dig down to the blasting cap to get the blasting cap out. So I've got the bag of HME. I bring it back to the truck, give it to Mick. He puts it in the bang box with all the other bang. I go back down, get the cap from Bruce, who pulled it out, brought it back to Mick. He put it in the cap pig, which is just this metal container that we just put the caps in there. So if it goes off, you don't know until you've opened that container back up. It's like Schrodinger's cap in there.
Like that.
So I went back down to get the device itself, and I threw it up on my shoulder. It was fairly girthy and heavy. Like, so I put it on my shoulder, and the guys are joking with me because at this point I've worked with these guys for 11 months. You know, I've never had an issue with them as a female. Like, never once was it weird. There were a couple times in the beginning, like the first time I ever peed in the read line, and I came out and there's like 5 dudes who'd taken a knee to be my security. I'm like, guys, I need one. Just one. Like, going over.
The stream's not that big.
Yeah. But they, you know, after that they were like, oh, she's just one of us. Like, you don't got to protect me. I'm here with you. I am a force multiplier. Like,
right.
So we developed a real good relationship with 2-5 Cav and the guys that we were supporting, especially our team. You know, because we were all fairly humble. Like, yeah, we're hotheads, and as compared to your everyday soldier, we're like, I'm EOD, I'm cooler than you. Fuck off.
Right.
But at the same time, like, if you need anything, yeah, no, I'll help. I got you. I'm like, what do you need? I'm there. Like, so we got along with them really well. They all knew me as Honey Bucket because that was the name I put on my my flak vest.
Where did that come from?
It came as a joke from my ex-husband because we were driving somewhere. I don't remember. We were heading back to base from somewhere, and I got called in, and I was like 6 hours away, and they're like, hey, we need you to get back and do this. And I was like, fine. And they're like, sorry, shit rolls downhill. And I was like, and I'm a honey bucket, apparently.
That's good.
So my ex had the honey bucket name tape made, and I was just like, yep, that's my call sign from now on.
Nailed it. Yeah, you're set now.
So they all called me that, and it was that or Mary. Like, no one ever called me Dague or Sergeant or anything. Just Honey Bucket or Mary. And that's the way I preferred it, because I never wanted them to get intimidated more, because like I said, going in initially, I'm already a female out in sector with them. There's already a bit of unease in the beginning.
Right.
So the more I can make them feel comfortable, the better we're going to work together. And I'm certainly not going to get offended by stupid shit.
Right.
Like, especially, we had one guy ask about, oh, who's up for Hooters after this? And I was like, I could definitely go for some titties and beer. And it was just a joke, you know. They're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, man, I was meant to calm you down.
Right.
But we're working.
But also, who isn't up for titties and beers? I mean, it doesn't really matter your sexuality. It's always fun.
Everybody loves titties.
Right. Right.
So we're working on I'm carrying the device back. I've got it on my shoulder, and one of the guys was like, they look at Mick, because my teammate's 6 foot and just built like a brick shit house. And they're like, you're going to let that little girl carry that big ass bomb? And he's like, nah, she's got it. And I'm like, fuck you guys. So brought it back, laid it down in the back of the truck. Mick had gone into the turret for whatever reason. So at this point, the back doors are open, the turret's open, and the 2 front doors are open. It was normally never like that. Mick's up in the turret. I lay the device down. When I had thrown it up on my shoulder, my weapon was slung. So the sling kind of flew around me and had come up over my collar and was kind of choking me. So I laid the device in the back, and then I turned and I grabbed my weapon, and I was like adjusting it to get the sling off from my neck. And I looked back up, and the device was just rocking, and I was like, oh no, you don't. And I grabbed it, and it detonated. And a lot of really, really lucky coincidences happened at the same time. So it detonated. It explosively amputated my right arm, shredded my left arm. They said it looked like a stripped hot wing. Um, my hand like flew off somewhere, but because all of the doors were open, the blast channeled out that way too, instead of just going into me, and it sympathetically detonated the bag of explosives that I had put there, or that I'd given to Mick to put there. That bang, that blast threw me before the frag could really shred
Oh,
me. Like I
wow.
still took some frag,
Right.
but nowhere near the amount that I would have if the blast hadn't channeled and the secondary blast hadn't thrown me. And we were parked directly in front of my medic's Humvee. That's the Humvee I hit.
Huh.
So when it went off, um, Mick got hit with a little bit, but he still had the wherewithal to realize what was happening. He flew out of the truck after me. I hit my medic's Humvee. As soon as he heard medic, he jumped out, and I'm right there. So they had, between Mick and my medic Nick, they had tourniquets on my arms within 30 seconds, and I'd already lost about a liter of blood, but they were able to keep me from losing any more. When it hit, everything went like dark, went black, and the sound, it's hard to describe. I describe it as the most deafening silence, like the loudest silence you ever heard. It's almost like you're in a church bell as Quasimodo screaming Sanctuary.
Right.
Like, you know it's loud, but there's nothing you can do about it, and you can't escape it, and it blocks everything else out. And I remember like feeling something on my back. Like I know I hit, and then I took a breath, and I was like, oh shit, I wasn't breathing. Um, and as it started to come to, I started to hear this woman screaming and screaming. And I remember thinking, like, someone shut that bitch up. And then I hit and I took a breath, and the screaming stopped. And I was like, oh, that bitch was me.
Wow.
Oops.
Yeah.
And so I'm laying there, and I'm like, I'm keeping my eyes shut. And in my head, I'm like, okay, it just rung my bell. It's just close. I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm like waiting to get my senses back. And, I can taste pennies and dirt, and I'm trying to take a breath, but everything smells like smoke and explosives and dust. Um, and I'm taking stock, I'm like, I'm feeling everything. I still felt my hands. Um, and I didn't feel pain. And I was like, okay, I'm okay. Just rung my bell. But then I was like, my combat lifesaver kicked in, and I was like, whatever I do, don't fucking look down. So if I look down and I see my injuries, I'm going to go into shock.
Yeah.
So I kept my eyes closed, and everything got bright. And I remember I looked up, but then I closed my eyes again because I was like, I don't want to look down. And that was my medic. I was wearing Oakleys at the time. Um, a piece of frag had embedded in the left lens, and it had pushed the lenses into my eyes. It broke my orbital bone on one side, or crushed it essentially. And then of course frag had shredded my face. And my medic had popped the lenses out from my skin. But I just had a small corneal scratch. I still have 20/20 vision. Like, I fucking swear by Oakleys.
I was gonna say your vision's better than mine, and I haven't gotten blown up once.
And so that was the brightness, and then me going like, nope, I'm not gonna look. And then he covered my eyes, and then like all of that happened within a couple seconds. It felt like forever, but it was just a few seconds. And then I remember her going, Mary, you okay? I'm like, where's Mick? Or I was like, Bruce, because Bruce was first there. I was like, Bruce, are you okay? He was the one talking to me, and he was like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm like, where's Mick? Because Mick was in the truck, and I was so fucking scared I killed him. Like, it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter who built that bomb. What matters is I was the last tech in positive control of that device. So whatever happened in the back of that truck, it's on me. And I know that. I've always known that. So I was fucking terrified that Mick was dead. And he was like, no, he's here. He's fine. And I was like, okay, well, what about? And they're like, Mary, shut up. It's just you. I'm like, okay. And then I just laid there and like talked to him. And at one point, this is the story I was going to tell you earlier. Doc, Gaines, he was Nick. He was like, hey, he's like, all right, I can't tell where you're bleeding from. I'm gonna cut your clothes off. And I was like, okay. And I hear him like hand somebody the scissors and he's cutting stuff off. And this dude's like, and Nick just snapped and he's like, if she was a dude, you already would have done it. Cut the fucking clothes off. And he's like, oh, so like, you know, they've got me, they're cutting my clothes off and I'm laying there and I'm in my bra and underwear and I feel the scissors go underneath my underwear strap and I hear my team leader, Bruce, go, dude, you don't got to cut those off.
So much for no sexism.
Right? And I start fucking giggling and then I'm like, ow, oh,
Right.
laugh. But it's one of those moments, like, you know, even though like the absolute worst situation is happening and I'm still able to laugh. So fuck you, terrorist. You never broke me. Like,
Yeah. What's amazing is, so you mentioned coming to, but it sounds like you have an incredible memory of everything that happened. Or like,
oh yeah, I was conscious the whole time. It just felt like everything slowed down, and that's probably the adrenaline reacting. Um, but like time was really weird during that. And I remember, you know, one of our guys, he kept asking, you know, Honey Bucket, are you okay? And I'd be like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm trying to talk, but I'm also trying to conserve my energy. So I'm like, yeah.
right.
And finally they're like, dude, I'm talking to her. She's okay. I'm like, okay. And then at one point they were like, all right, we have to get you out of here. The bird can't land here. We have to drive you to the LZ. I'm like, okay, the landing zone for the medevac. And I'm like, okay. And so I felt the hardboard get next to me. And so I tried to, pardon me, coffee burps are the worst. But I tried to like roll to one side to help them get the hardboard underneath me. I don't think I did much of anything, but
Yeah.
I did try.
That's what counts.
Yeah. And then like they load me onto the Humvee and Nick was sitting there holding on to me and he was like, all right, Mary. He's like, you doing okay? We're almost there. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, okay, I just gave you morphine. And I was like, thank you. Like,
Right.
it's like everything's starting to hit me. And I'm like, I'm trying to keep it together. Because at this point, this is when I start to realize like I'm getting on that medevac and I'm not coming back.
Yeah.
And I'm about to leave my team and my unit and all my brothers to fight the rest of this war without me. And I'll be damned if I'm going to leave them to think I'm going to fucking die. So I'm trying to keep it together. I'm not going to leave them with any worse of a memory than I already have. You know, I'm not going to fucking cry. You know, so they get us there. And this was another thing that never happened that also contributed to my survival was the medevac got to me in 14 and a half minutes. Wow. Like it was, it's almost like they were already in the air. Like Mary's going to get hurt today. like they were.
Do you know where was there just a base close by? Do you know where they were coming from?
I don't. I assume the cache in Baghdad.
Okay.
But they landed and they were putting me on the bird, and I remember going, "Oh man,
is that your car?"
Not mine. It's the neighbor's.
Okay. No, that's it's fine.
Sorry.
No, don't worry about it. I'll cut that out.
Yeah. But the medevac lands, and I remember them putting me on the bird. And Bruce was like, okay, they're here. And I was like, Bruce. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I'm going to be okay. He's like, I know. And I was like, no, I'm going to be okay. Like, I need you to actually feel that, man. And he was like, okay. And they get me on the bird. And the whole time, like, I'm laying there and I still refuse to open my eyes because if I look down, it's real. And so, like, the whole time in my head, I'm just like, stay awake. Don't go to sleep. Don't die. Just stay awake. Don't go to sleep. Don't die. And at one point the medevac, I assume the crew chief goes, hey, are you okay? And I remember going, what the fuck do you want from me? A thumbs up? I'm strapped to a gurney. Yeah.
It's amazing that you could make a joke like that.
And so they land and they're pulling me off, and I hear the doctor go, okay, Dague, or he's like, okay, specialist, we got you. Like, you're going to be okay. And I remember going, okay. And that's when I finally let myself go to sleep. And then I very, very briefly woke up in Baghdad in the cache after the initial surgeries. And I remember seeing my ex-husband and my best friend and my commander. Like, I saw their shapes. I didn't know who they were at first, and I could kind of hear them, but they all sounded like Charlie Brown's teacher.
Wah, wah, wah,
Like,
wah, wah, wah. Yeah.
yeah, like I knew I was in the hospital because all hospitals, doesn't matter where they are, they smell the same. And I was just
Yep.
like, yeah, I'm in the hospital. And then I tried to talk, but then I passed out again. And then I woke up in Germany. And it was the same thing. Like as I was coming to, everything's bright and white and shitty. It smells sterile. Like it smells like a hospital. And I finally like wake up, and initially like I knew when they had taken my flak vest off, that was the last impression I got. And I remember thinking that was too fast. Like, but I didn't want to acknowledge it on the ground.
Yeah.
So I woke up and I looked down at my left arm, and it was, covered by a blanket, but I could see where it ended. And I was like, oh, that one's gone. And then I looked down at the right and I was like, oh, fuck, it's even shorter. Like, okay, okay. And I look over, and my ex now, he was sitting there looking at me, and I'm like, is everybody okay? And he's like, what? Yeah, yeah, everybody's fine. And I was like, okay, then I'm okay. And then the nurse came in, and she was like, oh, hey, you're awake. How are you? Need anything? I was like, I'm really thirsty. And she's like, you can't have water. You can have ice chips. I'm like, that's fine. I'll take that. And so, my ex is spoon feeding me ice chips, any bit of moisture in that point, like take it. And she's like, oh, do you need anything? I'm like, I'm a little bit cold. Could I have a blanket, please? And she claps her hand over her mouth like I just fucking slapped her, and like starts trying to hold back tears. And she's like, okay, and leaves. And I'm like, what just happened?
Yeah.
My ex was like, I'm like, okay. And she comes back in, and she's like, oh, I forgot to grab this. I'm like, no, it's fine. And she's like, is that all you need? I'm like, no, just a blanket. Thanks. And she's like, okay, and leaves. And I'm like, what is going on? And I look over at Jared, my ex, and I was like, oh my God. And he's like, what? And I'm like, does my face look like chewed hamburger meat? Like, am I that ugly that she's crying when she sees me? And he's like, I'm like, oh God. And she comes back in, and there's like two other nurses with her, and they've got all these really like intricate handmade patriotic quilts. And they're like, here, we brought these for you. And I was like, I mean, thank you, but I really just need one. That's real sweet of you, but just one is good. And like all three of them are like, oh my God. And I'm like, what is going on? I'm so
This
sorry.
isn't helping.
Yeah, like if I have offended you, I'm sorry.
You're apologizing.
Like, thank you for your help. And the one nurse is like, no, it's just that when you guys come through here, most of you are injured like you, and I can see you're still in a lot of pain. So like my blood pressure's through the fucking roof.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in pain. She's like, and they're not very nice to us. And all I could think was my mom, the nurse. And I'm like, you guys are saving me. You're working your ass off to take care of me. My mom would whoop my ass if I was rude to you. Like,
Yep.
like, no, damn right I'm going to say please and thank you. And I'm angry. I am angry, but it's not at you.
Right.
Like, I'm angry at them. I'm angry at the terrorists, at the bad guys,
Right.
people who thought that it's okay to take other people's lives for their fucking beliefs.
Right.
I'm not angry at you. I'm thankful for you. And I hadn't realized up until that point that I was dealing with mine a lot different than most of the guys. And mostly because I didn't lose anybody. I lost pieces of me, and I was always accepting of that. I always knew that I could die for my brothers. What the fuck are my arms? What even are they compared to that? So I get it, but at the same time, I wish they wouldn't take it out on the people trying to help them.
I think, I mean, again, it speaks to your, I think, emotional intelligence. You say you were, 22 and dumb, but I think so many of those guys, when that happens to you, again, I mean, I shouldn't be telling you this, but I'm just saying, like, if I were in that situation, like, I'd just be pissed off that, I'm this young athletic guy, and now I can't play sports anymore. Like I'd be just pissed off at the world now that my life's ruined. And you can see how I'd be angry and want to take it out on whoever's in front of me. So
right.
I think that's just a level of emotional intelligence that you had to be able to put all that in perspective while you're in that moment, while you're in that pain, to say it's not, they're trying to help me. I mean, they're the people I should be treating nicely, not yelling at.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think part of that just comes from, you know, my upbringing, from being the daughter of people who are both in service industries. You know, one's a cop, one's a nurse, and they're very thankless jobs. You know, how many, like, people will thank their doctors? How many people think they're nurses?
Right.
You know, and it's something that I had seen firsthand for years. Um, and I think that absolutely played into it. Um, and don't get me wrong, I did break, and I did have those days. I finally, when I finally broke down, I had, you know, the day where I cried and I screamed and I stomped and I hated the whole fucking world, because why me and not them?
Right.
And then I realized I signed up for me and not them. If not me, then it would have been them, and that's not acceptable to me. And I had to break to actually realize that. And I think that's something that a lot of people who haven't broken don't realize.
Yeah. And just the fact that, I mean, going back to when you first saw the device wobbling and you went and reached for it, I think so many people would be running the other direction. You know, if you see this thing wobbling, you think it's about to go off, I'm just gonna go and try to save my own ass. But you said I've got to catch this thing so it doesn't go off and blow us all up. I mean, was that, did you have a conscious thought in your head when you went and reached for it that this is what I'm doing, or did you just,
Oh,
was it a,
yeah, no, that's always a thing. Like, with EOD, the reason it's so natural to just go, oh, hell no, is because you know it could go off. And if you don't stop it, people could die. And you are there to stop it. I stopped it a little bit slow.
could have been slower though?
Could have, but I'm thankful it wasn't.
So,
uh,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna say, like, it's something that I've seen EOD techs that their initial reaction is to save their own ass, and that's not always wrong. Um, but I've got a bit of a superhero complex, and so my initial reaction is never to run or duck or cover; it's to find the trouble and try to stop it. And that's not always healthy.
Yeah.
I put myself into some very dangerous situations because I act without thinking.
But we need people like you. We need superheroes.
Oh, man, if only I had the powers.
I think you got him. So, but how long were you in the hospital then?
Mm.
That, I guess, you know, just that initial period.
Start to finish, I was in the hospital for 14 days. And then so it was the day in Baghdad, and then the day or two in Germany. I don't really remember. I was out for most of that. But then they medevaced me to Brooke Army Medical Center. And again, this is in 2007, so this was when all the reports about the living conditions in Walter Reed were coming out, and it was
Right.
really none too pleasant. So at first they were like, we're gonna touch down at Walter Reed, and like the whole plane like audibly groaned, like, no. And they're like, don't worry, we're just refueling and we're going to BAMC. We're like, oh, thank God. But I actually have a picture of me on the medevac, because I was smiling, I was talking
Wow.
to people like, hey, what's going on? And one of the guys, it was his 21st birthday, and he lost both of his legs, and the medevac crew found out and smuggled a beer on for him and wrapped it with a bow of 550 cord.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I remember looking up and go, how do I get one of those? And they were like, oh, it's his 21st birthday. And I was like, oh, poor bastard. Yeah, he deserves a beer.
It's I've heard that from other people who've gotten injured too, which is, you know, they look at the person next to them and think, hey, look, they have it worse than I do. So
oh, yeah.
yeah, it's incredible to be able to look outside yourself and be able to, you know, put that in perspective.
I almost feel like it's probably a bit of a survival trait. Like it's something you got to do to mentally be like, okay, it's not as bad as it could be.
Yeah.
Like, but we touched down at BAMC, and they wheeled me in, and my doctor, he was a major at the time, and his last name was Kirk. And we wheel in, and I'm laying there, and I was like, Major Kirk, you know, or he was like, hey, I'm Major Kirk, I'm gonna be your doctor. And I was like, ah. He's like, what? I'm like, I bet you got a lot of shit as a captain.
That was the best promotion of your life, wasn't it?
And he starts laughing. He's like, yeah, I did. And he goes, okay, well, you're gonna be in here for about 6 to 8 months. And I was like, no, I'm not. And he's like, oh, yes, you are. You you were hit with a device that was made out of a homemade explosive, and those can be very deadly. I was like, Doc, don't lecture me about explosives. Like, there is no way in hell that I'm gonna be in this hospital for 6 to 8 months. And he just, I don't know if he like believed me or he was just like, I'm not gonna win this argument,
Yeah.
and was just being diplomatic. But he goes, okay. And so he's telling me with like the surgeries and everything, I'm probably gonna have infection, gonna be going through a lot. And I'm like, okay. And so they get me in the hospital, and I've had surgeries and cleanings and, surgery after surgery. And the 10th day was the day I broke. Um, I was laying there, and my sister and my mom were there. I should tell you that first. When my family first got there, it was like 4 days because they drove down from Montana to Texas. And my mom and dad came in first. They had to get, scrubbed down and put on their suits or whatever, because I was still in a clean environment. And my dad immediately went over and hugged my husband at the time. And I remember thinking, like, Dad doesn't hug dudes. What do they have me on? And I like looked up at my thing, and I see my mom as she starts to faint. And I'm like, Dad? And I'm like, Ma. And he's like, oh, runs over and catches my mom. And I'm like, oh shit, Mom, I'm okay.
Wow. It just must have been surreal, the entire thing.
It was very odd.
Yeah.
And before they even brought my family, and they told me my family was there, and I was like, can you guys like give me a sponge bath or something? I know that's weird, but I don't want my family to see me this torn up. They're like, oh yeah. So they bathe me down, brush my hair out. I'm like, thank you. Family comes in, we're talking. So then fast forward 10 days later, and I'm laying there, and my sister's sitting there, and she's like, Mary, you look bloated, like really bloated. And my mom goes, yeah, honey, when's the last time you took a shit? And I'm like, like the morning of the incident. And I was like, what? And like freaks out. They call in the doctors, and then like the nurses, like all of a sudden I'm just like flooded with medical care professionals. I'm like, what's going on, guys? And they're like looking through my charts, like, you haven't shit since you've been here? I'm like, I don't think so.
Wow. How long had that been?
10 days.
Wow.
Because apparently they're like, you could go into toxic shock. I'm like, that sounds bad.
Yeah, that's it. Toxic shock are not, those aren't tours. Those are tours that are bad enough on their own, and you put them together.
Oh, like, so what do we do? And they're like, okay, we're gonna like pump you full of laxatives. I'm like, all right. And so they pump me full of laxatives, and they put a bedpan under me. And if you've never tried to shit in a bedpan while laying down, it's awful. So I'm laying there for like 3 hours. I'm like, guys, it's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. Like, they're like, what do you want to do? I'm like, just let me wheel over to the bathroom, set me down in there, and let me do my thing. And they're like, okay. So they wheel me in there. I sit down, and within like minutes, boom, done. So like I'm still bandaged, and I reach over and like flush with my shoulder, and then I go to grab the toilet paper, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't. And I'm like running through every possible way I can think to do it. But at the time, now I can get my nubs together. At the time, I was getting them like this far together.
Wow.
And they're still bandaged up. They've got tubes coming out of them. I can't even try to use them. And then once I get it, what do I do?
Right.
Like, and it all hits me at once. Like I'm 23 now, and I can't wipe my own ass. And I fucking shattered. And I broke down, started crying for the first time since it happened. I was in there for like a fucking hour, just in my own little pity party. And my ex like peeks his head, and he's like, hey, you okay? And I was just like, I'm trying to hold it together, but he like immediately he's like, oh God, like comes in, shuts the door. And it still took another 10 fucking minutes for me to even get out. Like, I need help wiping my ass. And like that level of helplessness was what did it. I was a very independent person. That I thought, when I get 80, 90 and I'm invalid, yeah, get in here, wipe my ass. I'm going to be that old bitch. Yeah.
Right.
Not when I'm 23, and yeah, it broke me. And to his credit, Jared did, he cleaned me up. He didn't make me feel bad about it. He didn't say a word, took me back out, and they were like, Mary, you okay? And I was like, I just want everybody to leave. And so everybody left, and the rest of the night, I just cried and felt sorry for myself. And then the next day I was like, nope, I can't do this. I can't fall into this despair, or I will never fucking crawl out of it. And so I started trying to make a plan. Like, I'm going to learn how to use my arms. I'm going to learn how to use prosthetics. You know, they've talked about limb transplants. To me, that was a pipe dream, but it was still like, that would be awesome. But I started putting all my stock in hope, you know, and making a plan to be able to take care of myself again. And then 4 days after that, Dr. Kirk comes back in and he goes, well, Mary, I don't know how, but you can leave. And I was like, I told you. 6 to 8 months, you're hot.
Knock you back down to Captain Kirk. That's amazing. That's, you know, my mom always had this rule when something shitty happened to us growing up, that you had 24 hours that you could kind of wallow in it, and then you had to pick yourself back up and move on. If it was something really bad, she would say 48 hours. So none of us lost our arms. She might have given you 72 hours, but
you get 3 days.
Right. But there's always like, okay, you can have this small window where you can feel sorry for yourself, but there's got to be an end point where you say, all right, this is the situation that I'm in. Fuck it. How do I move forward from here?
Yep.
And that sounds like that's basically what you did.
I had to.
Yeah.
And I did have days after that. You go through, you know, hills and valleys, of course. And I did have days where I still broke down because I would get so frustrated trying to learn to do shit. Especially because, you know, technically not an old dog, but still learning new tricks that I'd already known. Plus I can still feel my hands. So for the longest time, for probably about the first year, if I would fall, I would immediately try to put my hand out to grab myself, or, you know, stop myself. And the biggest problem with that was I had neuromas on the ends of my nubs where the nerves were severed in the blast. You know, your brain is still sending signals to those nerves, and they're just swelling, and they've got nothing to go into. They've got nothing to send the message to and get the message back. So it just becomes this big ball of sensitivity. And it was to the point where if I even grazed my left nub, like kind of touched it on a table or touched it with a towel after getting out of the shower, it would fucking drop me. Like I would vomit. I would almost pass out. I would break out in a sweat because it was so fucking painful. So they ended up doing the TMR, which is the target muscle reinnervation surgery. So this big scar on both my arms, on the front and back. They split my biceps and my triceps down the middle, separated them with fascia so they can't grow back together, and then reimplanted the nerves that were severed in the blast into those muscles. And it's for two things. It stops the neuromas, which is awesome, but it also helps you use prosthetics better, myoelectric prosthetics, which are based on flexion. So I flex a certain muscle, it tells the prosthetic to either open the hand or close it or rotate the wrist, or in my case, manipulate an elbow. Which is why I don't use them anymore, because I don't have enough sites to manipulate it properly. I have one that I can use for driving, but it's not myoelectric, it's body powered. It's just a hook that goes off the end of my long nub, because I didn't want anything that could possibly fail in traffic. Like you're driving and your arm dies, and all of a sudden you're in somebody else's family van. Like, what happened? Like, sorry, my arm died. Forgot to charge it. Like,
so what, you know, after you're home and you're learning how to adapt, you know, I've heard this from a lot of people who, not even people who've been injured, but just people coming home and you know, getting out of the military. They lose that sense of purpose that they had of being with their guys every day, of having a mission. And you know, that's how a lot of these guys fall into depression. And so I'm sure you felt that times 1,000, because not only did you lose your mission, but now you're having to adapt to a whole new type of life. Like, was there, did you get that kind of feeling of depression? Did you find something to give you that purpose back?
yeah, it started actually in the hospital. After a few days, I was like, I want to get up and go to the window. And they were like, well, you can't get up. I'm like, yes, the fuck I can. My legs are fine. And they're like, well, you're on a lot of drugs. You're still in a lot of pain. I'm like, just hook me up to these little rolly things and let me go to the window. And they're like, well, why do you want to go to the window? I'm like, I want to see what I fought for. I just want to see America. I'm here. I haven't even seen it yet. And so I go to the window, like they were awesome about it. They tied a belt around my waist so they could like hold me up, because I can't use crutches or a walker or anything.
Right.
So they hold me up and they're standing with me at the window, and I'm looking out, and it's rush hour in San Antonio, and it's just wall to wall traffic. And I imagine that, there's somebody down there just in a pure fit of road rage because their day is shit. Now they're stuck in traffic and they have no idea what a bad day really is.
Yeah.
And I didn't even I didn't even mean to say it out loud, but it just kind of happened. I was like, wow, they have no idea what you lose in here, do they? And the nurse next to me started crying and she was like, nope. I'm like, I went to war so that war wouldn't change my home, so that war wouldn't touch my home, and that people's everyday lives didn't have to change, and it didn't. And that was really hard to accept because I changed, but they didn't. My home was the same. And it's so weird to see that when there's a war, there are people fighting and dying and losing pieces, even if you don't see the pieces that they lose. And here, the people we're fighting for, it's business as usual. And that's not to disparage Americans. I'm happy it didn't change us. But at the same time, it's really weird. Like it's almost hard to deal with. Especially because they're not the people you feel like you can talk to about it. My guys would call me, they would call me from Iraq, except for Mick. Mick and I didn't talk until he got home because he thought I was mad at him and blamed him. And I thought he was mad at me and blamed me. And so we didn't talk till he got home. And then my purpose became to be positive, be happy, I'm alive, and work to prove to the guys that, hey, I'm going to be okay. Please don't have survivor's guilt over me. Of course they did. There's no stopping that. And I would too. But the better I live, the happier they are, the better they can live without a feeling of guilt, or even regret. I got so mad at them, and I got so mad at other people who were like, well, they should have been the one handling it because you're a girl. Like, fuck you. It was my job. Right. Like, you don't get to take that from me. So when Mick and I, the first time we talked, was when the unit came back. It was about 4 months after I'd been blown up. Found out the guys were coming home. I had had a surgery. My ex and I drove over to Washington to see the guys come back. I got to actually meet them on the flight line. And I felt bad because a general, a 2-star came out, and he's got his whole entourage, and he's doing the like greeting everybody. So they're getting off the plane. And the first guy didn't see me. The second guy, Daniels, my buddy John, he was like, Mary's here. And everybody after that just completely bypassed the general. Like, fuck you, sir. Like, so I'm like standing in like all my brothers, like this big, massive group hug, and we're all fucking crying. And then like the seas part, and there's Bruce and Mick, and like the three of us are all just like, I miss you so much, you piece of shit. So we're like, we're hugging and crying, and we get back to like the staging area, and I'm talking to both of them, like, so like, because nobody would really tell me. They'd just be like, no, everybody's fine. They always kind of skirted the question. And I was like, so nobody got hurt, right? Like everybody else was good. And Mick was like, well, I mean, I, had a little bit of frag to the ass, and was like, oh my God, the IED fragged your ass? Because he had been standing up in the turret, and he's like, oh no, they think it's bone. And I'm like, oh my God, the blast shattered your ass? And he's like, no, they think it's pieces of your arm. And I was like, oh, buddy, we'll be together forever.
It's almost like a friendship ring. Now you need a piece of his bone.
Right. He was like, you're so fucked up. I'm like, whatever, you love it.
That's so funny.
But so in that moment, it was like, no, man, I'm not mad at you. I'm happy you're alive. And he was the same. Like we had our heart to heart of like, I'm so sorry. And I'm so sorry. I'm like, why are you sorry? I should be sorry. And like, found out we were both mad at ourselves because we thought the other was mad at us, and we were both so wrong. Right.
I know you work a lot with people coming back and trying to help them kind of transition, and because I've never been able to wrap my head around how do you come back from that and then go and sit in an office all day? I mean that.
Ooh, and that's the thing too, is like, so no two people are alike.
Yeah.
So for me, the whole working in the bottom of the Pentagon was a fucking nightmare. I couldn't even fathom it. Like working in the basement of a Pentagon, no windows, nothing. Like I'm an introvert, not
Right.
like that.
Right.
um, Plus I would have, had to have been reading all the reports from, my brothers out there doing the cool shit while I'm like, so then you do this and then you do this. And like, it would have broken my heart. But I have another friend who got out and that's what he does and he loves it and he's great at it.
Yeah.
Um, so it comes down to trying to figure out, okay, what are you passionate about? Because you don't want to just go out and go to a 9 to 5. You're just going to get depressed and feel like you're not actually accomplishing anything. Especially if you were doing the cool guy shit in the military, because you felt like you had a purpose and something that's larger than yourself. You had an objective every day, and then you get out and you lose that structure, and then you kind of lose the, well, why am I doing this? Unless you have some skin in the game, unless you give a shit about it.
Right.
Um, so like I've had friends who, get out and they go to work for their parents because, it's the family business. And I'm like, I just can't do it. Like, and they have to go off and find something else because at some point over there, you find out who you really are. Um, for some of us, it's you find out you're stronger than you ever thought you were. For some of us, you find out that you're not.
Yeah.
Or you're at worst, you're weaker than you thought you were. Which doesn't happen too often, but you get one sense of weakness and it sits in you, it festers like an infection and it starts to feel bigger than it is. You're not weak, but you had that feeling once and you were never able to let it go. And that happens to a lot of us.
Yeah.
Which I think that's the biggest hurdle.
And I think that's why it's so hard for civilians to connect too, because we've never most civilians have never been tested like that. I don't know what my limitation is, and to try to talk to someone who has hit that limit, and whether you've come out on the good side or the bad side of that, you've at least seen your limit. And I think that changes a person no matter what happens, to know the extent of who you are. And that's, to me, that's where the big disconnect between the military, the veteran, and the civilian communities come in. Is just civilians cannot possibly relate, no matter how hard they try, with someone who's been tested like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean that translates to a lot of different facets of our lives. Like you can empathize and you can try to understand as far as your experience goes. Um, but without having had it, you'll never actually know. Same with like even for me, like racism. Um, I can empathize. I can see where it's bad and where it's really fucking terrible, but I've had very minimal experience with it. And my
Right.
minimal experience was somebody tried to buy me in Iraq. I was like, how fucking dare you? I am not a commodity.
Right.
um, but I don't truly know what it's like to experience that on a this is your life level.
Right.
Um, and I feel like if I kind of wish that people would think about their differences in socialization more, when it comes to having different experiences rather than trying to judge it, or trying to pick it apart to make sense of it. Just understand that it's an experience, that it's something that somebody is going through, and that how they deal with it is a reflection of what they're going through and what they've been through in their life before.
Right. Tell me if you're running short on time, because I could talk to you all day, but I want to get into the VA and everything that
Oh yeah.
you had going on there. So I was listening to Joe Rogan a few weeks ago, and he had Matt Best and Evan Hafer on from Black Rifle Coffee, and they're
Good.
telling about the story about their friend Mary and what she was going through with the VA, and you can't understand how pissed off I got hearing this story. So I'm glad I get to talk to you, because I want to hear it from your perspective, everything that was happening with that, and what the resolution was.
Yeah, I should preface it by saying that on the whole, the VA has been amazing to me, especially my primary care team, my doctor, my case manager. the social workers, everybody that I've worked with so far, with the one exception. Well, actually, there's been three exceptions, but that are on my team, they're amazing. They're the reason I'm still alive. They found out when I got breast cancer. They found it within 2 weeks of growth because they were just Johnny on the spot with their job.
I didn't know you had breast cancer. Can you save a little trauma for the rest of us?
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's
You just hit me with that one.
Sorry. Didn't mean to drop the
I need to recover a little bit here. Give me a second.
And then when I was in high school, my dog. But they've been largely amazing. But they have the caregiver support program, which is fairly new. It started in, I want to say 2010, 2009, maybe. But the caregiver program is not essentially for the veteran. It's the caregiver support program. It's because we need so much help that our families or even our friends or somebody that we hire has to take so much time out of their life that they can't just, take vacation days from work. Some of them can't work. I'm lucky in that I've learned to do enough stuff on my own to survive for 8 hours or a day or whatever. But that doesn't mean that I don't need help a lot. And I will say this experience with the debacle, the caregiver support program, was probably one of the most depressing since I've been blown up, because for 2-3 weeks, every single day, I was having to reiterate multiple times a day everything that I can't do. And my existence since I've been blown up has been largely trying to focus on the things that I can do, improve those, and then try to find ways to do the things I can't do. But there are some things I just have to fucking swallow my pride on and admit that I can't do it. And there's no amount of, feel good that's going to make that go away. It's a fact of my life. Which, when you space it out, it's not a big deal. It's a thing here or there, if, throughout the day, and it becomes, part of your routine. So when my husband's home, he's normally my caretaker. Right now, he's over in Syria because he's still active duty Army. He's EOD as well. Our normal day is, get up, shower in the morning, like together. He helps me with like washing my hair and everything. Because I can only reach like the top of my head. Like there's certain things I can't reach it. There's nothing I can do about that.
There's one option for that.
I'm not down. My hair is the one feature I give a shit about.
I'm just throwing it out there. I don't have to worry about shampooing.
Well, it's like, so we do that. He goes to work. I normally go back to bed because I've probably been up to like 5-6 a.m. because I don't sleep very well. That's to do with like tinnitus, and the blast gave me a traumatic brain injury, but a mild one. But my shutdown sequence is backwards now. So most humans, when you go to sleep, your hearing is the first thing to turn off. For me, it doesn't turn off. It's like a cat. It's always on. And as soon as I hear something, I wake up and I can't just go back to sleep. So very much an insomniac. It takes hours to fall asleep. But I'll go back to sleep. He'll go to work. I'll get up. I'll, have coffee and like write on my iPad, catch up on social media, and then get ready, do a workout. When normally by the time I'm done with my workout, he comes home, helps me like rewash my hair. Because I can like shower after that, but I'll just be like, hey, help me wash my hair quick. And then we'll either start streaming or we start cooking. And like I'm in control of the recipes, but he does all of the things. Because I'll tell you what, right now I am dangerous to myself around an oven or with any sort of sharp anything. Like, I don't have a whole lot of feeling in my nubs. I can feel extreme things. But I can't tell you the amount of times, James or Elise will be like, you're bleeding. And I'm like, what, where? like your nub. I'm like, it's like just a big old slit. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what happened. It's like,
Right,
I
you're
don't
trying to rack your brain about what you did, right?
yeah, I'm like going through it. I'm like, did I use a cheese grater today?
Yeah, what you're trying to figure out? Yeah, what kind of blade was that?
Right? Like, what have I done? And I get like these weird like rug burns, or I've had this one that's been on the back of my nub for the last like 6 weeks, and I keep going like, what do I even do
Right.
with that part? And it was just the other day I was working out, and it was one of my resistance bands. The Velcro is like overlapped, and it was scratching on it.
Yep, I know
I
exactly what you're
couldn't
talking
feel it.
about. Yep.
But it's we've got a lot of stuff. Anytime we travel, James sets up all of my adaptive equipment. He helps me with everything while we're traveling, because it's not like I can just go into any bathroom. I've got a travel strap, but whether or not it's got anything I can put the travel strap on, I can't tell you how many times I've had to just hold it and hope for the next bathroom that has something I can use. And it's terrifying. Like, you never really know. There's a whole lot of planning that goes into everything I do. And not just planning for being able to do something. I have to plan to be able to take something down and set it back up, which gets very frustrating, especially when you look for handicap things. Most handicap things are to help people with a walking disability. Very few are to help people who don't have hands.
Right.
So like you go into any bathroom and they've got the dome that covers the toilet paper. What am I supposed to do? Reach up into that? I've got
I can't. I have trouble with that, and I got 10 fingers.
Right. So there's so much that I need like help with it. It's frustratingly simple, and I know how to do it. I just can't.
Yeah.
And having to go over that over and over and over was so frustrating. And this was the first time Elise was acting as my caregiver. She's a friend of ours. Her husband served with James, my husband, and we've been friends for years. But this deployment, because of COVID, was it was yo-yoed, and Elise was like, I'll take care of you. I'll be there. I'm like, thank you. You're amazing. And she is. She's here every day. She takes care of me. She sets everything up before she goes to work, and she works a full-time job. The caregiver support program is there to support her for helping me. Like, what is she supposed to do? She has her own life. She has her own house. She has a husband. She's got her own responsibilities. I am a second job. Like, she needs to be compensated for that, because there's times that she's going to have to take off of work and she loses money for that. That's her livelihood. She should be compensated for that. And that's the whole point of the program. So we were going through the process to get her certified as my caregiver. But because of COVID, everything's been slowed way down. And I understand that. I don't blame the VA for that. Completely understandable, even if it is, what's the word I'm looking for? Inconvenient.
Right.
So we were going through everything with that. We had done all of the meetings. Even one of them, trying to get the appointments was like pulling teeth. And they were like, oh, you have to get all of this done before October 1st. They told us that was our deadline, or we'd have to apply again, at least the caregiver support coordinator we were working with at the time. They were like, oh, you have to get it done by October 1st, or you have to reapply. Like, okay, that's never been a thing before, but fine. So we start doing the application process. Most of the appointments have to be done via Skype, or Zoom or whatever, because we can't go into a hospital during COVID. So we're trying to set them up, and one of them, they were like, okay, we can get you in for the occupational therapy one. And there were supposed to be 2 more after that. One more like final evaluation, and then a in-home teleconference visit. And they were like, okay, we can get you in for the occupational therapy one on October 29th or September 29th. And I'm like, you realize that's 2 days before October 1st?
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah. I'm like, you realize the VA does nothing in 2 days? Nothing gets done in 2 days ever? I'm like, that's a bad plan. And then you're pushing my deadline back. Why? So in the middle of that, a friend of mine died of brain cancer, and I was getting ready to go to her funeral, and the VA called and like, hey, can you do an appointment today? I'm like, I can do it after 1. They're like, can't you do it earlier? I'm like, I'm going to a funeral. No, like, I'm sorry. I know you guys think I don't have a life and I just sit here waiting for you all day. I don't. Like, I still have shit that I have to take care of. And my schedule is not on hold because the VA might call me. Like, so
Right.
I got upset about that. And of course, because, my friend's funeral was early on in the day, I didn't sleep the night before because I was bummed out. Um, and like any true military or Irish person, I got drunk the night before. So
Yep.
that was sad. So the next morning I'm like hungover and at the funeral, and then I come back and they do the OT appointment, and I'm no filter, none whatsoever. Like, how do you clip your toenails? I'm like, I just stub my toe and the problem solves itself. Like,
And these people have no idea how to respond. I mean,
yeah, but then they have to ask you these questions that I know that they're reading it from paper,
right.
but they're like, okay, so do you have a walk-in stall or is it a bathtub shower combo? Like, bathtub shower combo. How do you get into it? Like, I I step into it. They're like, do you need help? I'm like, no. I
Still
just,
got the legs.
yeah, legs are still good. And like, okay. And then one of them, they were like, okay, so are there stairs going into your house? Like, yes, there's 3 from the patio. And like, are there stairs in the home? Yes. Like, how many? I'm like, okay, so I count them like 15. And they're like, okay, is there a handrail? Like, yeah. I'm like, okay, good. Like, all right. And there's like, is there a handrail in your shower? Sure is. What are you getting at? Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I just want to make sure it's safe. I'm like, you realize I can't use a handrail, right? I lack the required equipment. Like, and then they're like, okay, so ambulation, how are you with that? Like, you walk in? I'm like, yeah, I walk just fine. Like, no canes, crutches, walkers. Like, how do you think I'm going to use it? How? Like, like,
Are they like when they're asking you these questions, like are they like reading it off the paper, knowing like, hey, I got to ask you these questions? I know it doesn't make, or do they
I
like think that they're asking you legitimate questions?
it's half and half. So I've had the caregiver support coordinators that are here, or that I've worked with for years, and they're just like, "Oh, this doesn't pertain to you. This doesn't pertain
Right.
to you." But then you get the ones who, I don't know if they just can't separate what is applicable and what is not.
Yeah.
But they just feel like they got to ask everything, and I'm like, "Use your common sense, guy.
Right.
You're a doctor." Like, so like, even like driving, they were like, do you drive? And I was like, well, not now because I have to get a new license, and COVID hit and we just didn't have time to get the truck adapted. And they're like, oh, so you don't have hand controls? I'm like, no, no, I do not. Like, doc, what a hand control is going to do for me?
I need something else in addition to hand controls that I do not have.
Like, come on, man. It's just, but I mean, it kind of gives you this feeling like, they're not really there for you. They're there for what they think a disability is, and that may or may not be you.
Right.
Um, it it also kind of feeds this feeling of the VA doesn't care. It's about the numbers. About the people in the VA, they probably very much care, but the system itself, not so much.
Right. What you and as a civilian in your head, you think the whole point of the VA is that people in the military have their own medical system that's built for them, so that the doctors, the caregivers, whoever it is, can relate to the patient. That's the whole reason why you're not part of the civilian network.
And you would hope, but you spend so much time justifying your injuries and your needs and reiterating all the things you can't do, and they keep acting like it's going to change. Like, one day you're going to wake up and, oh shit, my arms grew back. I'm good now, guys, thanks. They Every single year I have to go back in and get reevaluated. Like, my doctor's amazing, so my reevaluations are very much like, everything's the same. Yep, thanks, doc. But I've gone to, I've had other doctors. Like, when we moved to Florida, I had new doctors. When I first saw my oncologist after like 3 years, This woman spent 45 minutes crying, telling me how my life is over. My life is basically worth nothing now because I was too stupid when I joined the army and the recruiters tricked me into a job I didn't understand. And
Jesus.
oh, it was one of those like, oh, I've never wanted to hit a woman in the face so much in my life. I just sat there like, and my husband's right there who teaches at the EOD school at the time. And she's basically saying like he's tricking all these young kids into throwing their lives away. Like, listen, bitch. Like, I made an informed decision, a very informed decision. And I hate to say it, yeah, I'm not a doctor, but right now I feel like I'm smarter than you. Like, holy shit. Like maybe your life would be over. Don't project your weakness onto me. Don't assume that you understand my pain or that I need you to fight for me. I fucking don't. Like,
Yeah.
it's so frustrating
Well,
to deal with people like that.
it goes back to when you were the first woman in your unit and you're saying just treat me like a normal person. Don't treat me
Yeah.
as this special something else. I have this disability. I know I have to live my life differently. Help me do that. And otherwise don't treat me like I'm some victim.
Right. And it actually, okay, it's led me to this weird nuanced, like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's not an emotion. It's like an amalgamation of emotions. But when I get into like arguments with people, or if people are catty about me, I've had it happen a few times. Um, like once I went to the EOD ball, and I was quite thin, and I was wearing a very tight dress. And I thought I was very pretty. But I was walking through, and there was a woman who was like, well, when you're that skinny, you can wear anything. And she said it super catty, but I was flattered. I was like, she treated me like a person, not like an amputee. Like, not, she wasn't like, oh my God, you're so beautiful and brave and strong. She was like, bitch, you're pretty because you're skinny. Like, thank
Thank
you. Like,
Please talk shit to me. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I actually appreciate it because somebody actually recognizes, yeah, I'm an amputee, but I'm still a fucking person. I'm
Right.
capable of being an asshole.
Right.
Like, and I hate to say it, you go through a traumatic injury like this, it's just a personality enhancer. If you were a kind, compassionate, funny person before, or a big ham like I was, it just gives you more fuel for your jokes. You're probably going to be more compassionate because now you understand true pain. Now you understand real loss, and not just personal, but being ripped from everything that you ever wanted,
Right.
and having choices taken away from you. But if you were an asshole or a selfish person before, it's just going to give you more reason to be an asshole and selfish. And I've
Well,
seen that time and time again too.
I mean, I know a fraction of that just because growing up, I was always the smallest kid in class, and I'd get teased all the time for that. And I, it's a similar situation in that I could have become a victim. I could have let that crash me, or I develop a sense of humor and I learn how to laugh at it, and I learn how to give shit back to other people. And
Exactly.
it's right. Like, which direction would you rather go? And that's when they want to turn everyone into a victim. Who are you helping in that situation?
Right. And who are you mad for?
Right.
Like, are you like, do you even realize why you're mad? Like, I've had people, like, I actually got into this discussion today on Twitter, because somebody, who is it? Assassin's Creed, made a character description about one of the villains, and it says that growing up she had trauma that marred her face, and she felt, what was it, something about she felt disfigured, and because of that she would get angry and lash out, to deal with her disfigurement and her emotions, uh, surrounding that. She was prone to bursts of violence. That's perfectly acceptable. Somebody got mad, somebody who is not marred, somebody who is not like me with burns and surgical scars and frag scars, was like, oh, this is unacceptable. This is basically saying it was ableist, and disfigured is just unacceptable. Do better, writers. Like, who are you fighting for? Because it's not me.
Right.
You're fighting for what you think you would feel like in that position. You're not putting a fucking lick of thought into what any of us actually go through. Disfigurement is just a description. It is not an ableist term. It is not an offensive term. It is factual. I am disfigured. That doesn't mean that I'm hideous. It just means that I'm not as I was before. Yeah, I have scars. Yeah, I'm marred. Sometimes I'm embarrassed by them when I get called out on it. That doesn't mean that I like if someone goes, "Oh, is that what disfigured your face?" Like, "Oh yeah, the blast." That's as far as that goes. I'm never like, "Oh my god, you said disfigured. It hurts." That's not a thing. And having people like that are like, "Oh, it's negative." That just reinforces that we should be weak. It reinforces that people see us as weak. And if we're not, then all of a sudden they're uncomfortable with it and they feel like they need to white knight for us because we must be in denial. I don't need a fucking hero. I don't need anybody to tell me what I feel. I know what I feel and I know how to say it. And if I'm offended, I'll tell you. I'm not.
Right.
And then I had somebody arguing with me, like, well, maybe you're not offended, but other people are. Like, are you disfigured? No. Then why are you talking for them?
Yeah.
Why? Like, you're not mad for anybody but yourself. You're mad because you're uncomfortable and you don't know how to deal with it because you've never actually been there. And I understand that, but don't you dare try to tell me or anybody else how we should feel about our own bodies. And don't you dare try to shame us into not using words that we use to describe ourselves. And if a writer did that, the writer was accurate. That is a writer who did their research before writing a character. And I'm glad they did because I'm not going to sit here and go, oh, I don't use words like disfigured because I might upset myself.
Right.
Like this level of social justice is just ridiculous. Like you're just trying to find a reason to be a white knight because you don't have anything to be mad about today. Get
That's,
over yourself.
yeah.
Like,
Well, I that's exactly that's how I see it is that there people are looking for a cause. They're looking for something, and whether I'm sure COVID just was fuel to that fire that people
oh
are
yeah,
just kind of looking. They're bored. They got nothing else to do. So to have something that you feel like you're fighting for, no matter how unjustified or how wrong you are about it, they just need that thing to latch onto.
absolutely. And I get it. Like if somebody asks you to fight, like with the VA, when I my Twitter post was just a rant. I was ranting because I was pissed off. When I get pissed off, I get very sarcastic. Um, but then people were like, "Hey, do you need help with this?" And I was like, "Actually, yes." That is different than seeing something that's not a problem, but internalizing it as or projecting as if it were you, you think it would be a problem. So then you just jump in and create a fight where there was none because, oh, I'm going to help this weakling over here. No, fuck you. I'm not weak. I'm not a victim. Like if I'm a victim of something, I will say it. I will ask for help, but I'm not so meek that I would just internalize it. And not a lot of us are, especially if you've gone through trauma, because at some point you learn you have to swallow your pride, especially like in a traumatic amputation like this, or even a congenital one. You live through something like this through your whole life. It is a daily exercise in how often you can swallow your pride without losing your humanity or your sense of self worth.
Yeah.
So when I have somebody try to tell me I should feel offended, I'm more offended that they think I should. I'm more offended that they think that I should be weak. That is ableism. Like taking the choice away from me and assuming my weakness. That's ableist. I'm not saying
Yeah.
disfigured.
I, I want to get back to the VA because this
Oh,
to me
sorry. Yeah.
no
I'm
no
sorry.
no 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 that was I'm glad you said that because that was something that I wanted to talk about too. But I want to talk about the story that Matt was talking about on Rogan about how uh, you were
Yeah.
going on vacation with your go ahead.
Well, okay. So we had done the process. We got lucky, and they did the last OT, occupational therapy interview with me earlier. But the only reason that happened was because the doctor was going on vacation and realized the dates and was like, "Oh, we need to get this done before." So the much thanks to that doctor. Uh, so my friend Yeska came to visit for my birthday because husband's deployed, and we had these plans for months that she was going to come visit for my birthday because she had also helped my sister when my niece got burned really badly and had to go into a burn ward. Um, and she had sent my sister a care package and sent my niece a care package. And so when she came out, I was like, well, I want you, it's like an 8-hour drive to my folks home in Montana. I want you to meet Jen and Josie. Because they've been singing your praises since you sent them the care packages, and they've been in communication since then. So I wanted Yeska to meet them. And it was, my birthday was like the perfect excuse for her to come visit, and we'll go drive over and see my family. Um, so she gets here. Um, she's helping me out while she's here because she's here. I'm not just gonna
Right.
like, oh no, don't worry about that. We'll wait till Elise gets home and just add that to her pile of other shit she's doing. Like, Yeska's here, she's willing to help. Why wouldn't I ask her to help?
Right.
That's ridiculous to assume that. No, sorry, only my caretaker can ever do things for me. Otherwise, it doesn't count.
Right.
So she's helping me out with stuff, and then we're getting ready to go to Montana. We were packing the day before, and I am a serial procrastinator. I procrastinate everything, especially packing, because I hate it. So Elise gets a call, and they're like, "Hey, you've been approved as the caregiver. We'll do the in-home visit on this day." And she was like, "Well, Mary's going to be in Montana." I'm like, "What do you mean Mary's going to be in Montana?" Like, "Well, she's going to Montana to visit her family for her birthday." And they were like, "Oh, okay." And so Yeska and I drove over, stayed at my dad's, had my birthday. I called the day after my birthday, and Elise was like, "So, I have something to tell you." I'm like, "What?" She's like, "They denied the caregiver program. Like they've disqualified us." I'm like, "We just got approved. What do you mean? Like we got approved one day, and then there was one day in between, and now we're disqualified? What happened?" And she's like, "Well, they called and they were asking me about stuff, and I told them you went to Montana, for your birthday. And then they called back today and said that they re-met and you've been disqualified." I'm like, "They disqualified me because I went to visit my family who's been with me since I was blown up for my birthday. What?" And so I called them. I called the caregiver coordinator, the one that Elisa talked to, and they were like, well, it's just that you don't need a lot of help." I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Well, you're off on your own right now." I'm like, "You think I drove to Montana? No, I did not. Like, I'm with somebody who helped me." And they're like, "Well, you take frequent trips on your own." I'm like, "No, I do not. This is the second time in 4 years, and I'm not alone. Like, this is the second time in 4 years that I've traveled without my designated caregiver. That is not frequently. You want me to get you a dictionary?" They were like, "Well, and your caregiver didn't know where you were when we called." I'm like, what did she say?" "Oh, she said you were out running errands and she didn't know where you were." I'm like, "First of all, there's no way in hell Elise said that, because I don't run errands. I don't. Like, if I'm going somewhere, Elise is with me." Like, and they're like, "Well, that's not how it was said." I'm like, "I am certain that it is. I am certain that she said something and you drew your own conclusions without fact checking. And now we are being punished for it." Like, "Oh, that's not what, no, it's, well, and also it's, that you seem to have other people who help you. And since your husband is active duty, you obviously don't need a lot of help." I'm like, "I'm sorry, what?" They're like, "Well, what do you do all day when he's gone?" I'm like, "Oh, first of all, none of your fucking business, but since I gotta, I sit around, I write, I work out, I play video games. That's it. I don't leave. I don't get in the car and go run errands. I don't go do random shit. I stay at home. Like, just because I can put shit off doesn't mean that it can't ever get done. Like, and it doesn't mean that I can't schedule it." So this is the first woman that, or actually first person since 2008 that I've legitimately lost my cool with and yelled at. Um, and
Understandably.
Oh well, and this, she had this Susie cream cheese fucking voice the whole time that I was like, "Oh, you will taste the back of my nub." But she she at the end, she was like, "Well, I'm really sorry that you're upset by this." I'm like, "Are you? You shouldn't be upset that I'm upset. You should be upset that you fucking lied and screwed me over and screwed my friend over. My friend who's been waiting for months to get paid just for helping me. Something that you have a program to do." And then come to find out, which I knew to begin with, after she had got off the phone with Elise, she called the doctors and was like, "Oh, Mary's off running errands and her caregiver doesn't know where she is. Like, we need to disqualify them. They're trying to milk the system." So she said that I was off running errands by myself and nobody knew where I was, or my caregiver didn't know where I was, that I was alone for days at a time, and that I frequently traveled without my caregiver, all of which are lies.
Yeah.
And I lost my shit. And then she was like, well, you can always reapply. I'm like, I'm sorry. Did I miss the part where October 1st was the deadline? And you want me to go through all of this again? You can't just start it back up like you just ended it? No, you'd have to go through the process again. I'm like, that is unacceptable. Like, I'm losing out on the legacy benefits because you lied. Not you made a mistake. You jumped to conclusions without fact checking. That's a lie. And I have to pay for it. I have to fix your mistake because you couldn't be bothered to pick up the fucking phone and ask where I was, or even ask Elise a follow-up question. If she had, if she thought Elise had said that I was out on my own and she didn't know where, the very first thing she should have said, if she actually gave a shit about my well-being, which is what she kept saying she was caring about, is, what do you mean? That's all she had to ask.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Where's Mary? Like, is she with somebody? Is the veteran safe? You can't tell me that that's what you care about when you never once asked a follow-up question to that end. And instead, you went directly to the team and said that I was trying to milk the system.
Was this someone, was she assigned to your case? Like, had you talked to her
Never
before?
met her before.
Okay.
No, she's never met me in person. We had talked on the phone twice, and it was very brief. This was somebody who thought they knew what was going on and acted on impulse without facts, without observation. And it's just, and the thing is, I am not the only one that happens to. My case is really easy to go, oh, you done fucked up. like you just look at my arms like, you're saying she doesn't need help? But what if you got somebody with a TBI who looks normal, but towards the end of the day, they can't function or their legs stop moving?
Right.
Like, what if you have somebody who has a constant stutter, can't get the words out, but they have people who understand what they're getting at and they work through that with them, but to you, they look normal on the outside. And that's what people dealing with the VA deal with all the time. And to have my case that is so obvious still go through that, it just really highlights a massive flaw in the system. There should never be a person who has that much power that they can go, oh, this and this is happening, so we need to shut off the benefits like now, without checks and balances, without fact checking, without even just a follow-up from the doctors. None of that happened. She simply sent up notes that were lies. They reconvened and denied.
This is what is infuriating. We have trillions of dollars that we can spend on these wars,
right?
And to send people over, send young, healthy people over to go and blow things up and to keep the country safe. It's not that they're doing bad things. They're accomplishing good things.
Don't get me wrong. There are bad people in the military, just like everywhere else.
Yeah, but then you're going to nickel and dime the people that you sent over there to go and fight under your flag when they come back and they get hurt. Why don't we don't have the money for that? We can't at least default to let's help the people who are hurt.
Yep. And no, that's exactly it. So when you sign the dotted line, it is a contractual obligation of the government. If you lose life, limb, or eyesight, you or your family will be compensated. And a lot of people don't understand that. The fact is, they're planning for these wars. They're not planning for the effects of the wars. They're not planning for all the shit that happens on the back end. You know, they're not planning for the treatment of mental health. They're not planning for, you know, a double arm amputee that's above the elbows. They're not planning for TBIs. They're not planning in the long term for taking care of these people. They're just hoping they're going to come up with medical advancements on the fly, or maybe they'll die before it matters.
It's sickening. I don't understand why that's not a national scandal.
Oh, it should be. And it has been a couple times, but they always fix it just enough that people are like, oh, they're doing stuff. Yeah, are they?
Sure.
Well, I don't see it. Like you've got some amazing people in the VA that want to help. Yeah. Their hands are tied.
You just get crushed by the system.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your current status right now? What happened?
Okay, so that tweet went viral. I did not intend for it. It really was. I was just ranting. I was frustrated. I was pissed off. and I let it fly. And I mean, if you read it, it's dripping with sarcasm, like, because that's both my love and my hate language,
Sure.
um, and it's what I revert to. Uh, but that tweet went all the way up. The secretary of the VA personally called the caregiver or the regional manager of the caregiver support program here and was like, "You will handle this." They fixed it over the weekend. Like they were working on it on a Sunday because they were like, "You fucked up."
Right.
Um, and then I had several people that were like, "Oh, cancel the VA, get that person fired, blah blah blah." Like honestly, I don't want to do that. As pissed off as that chick made me, she's the smarmiest bitch I've ever talked to. I also don't think she'll learn if she's fired or she has her livelihood ruined. And that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to destroy a livelihood. I was trying to preserve Elise's livelihood. Because I'm not the one getting the money for that. Elise is. I'm not the one reaping the benefits. Elise is. And she should. She should be compensated for that all the time she's taking out to take care of me because the government's not doing it. I don't want that woman to lose her job, her livelihood. We already have a massive amount of unemployed right now because of COVID. I'm not going to add to the problem, but she needs to learn. And so they're like, "Well, what would you have her do?" And I was like, "Oh, definitely a sensitivity class because I can't think of anything more fucking mind numbing than 8 hours of sitting there going, 'Don't say this, don't say that,' and being treated like a child." And I
The
hope for
worst
every
punishment.
fucking minute she was like, "I hate Mary."
That's great. That's the perfect punishment. I love that. But it's sad that it takes a tweet for them to go and try to fix this for one person. And I mean, it's great
Right.
that it was fixed for you.
It
But like
is.
you said, this is happening all over the country.
All over. And especially because they were doing a big, massive revamp of the caregiver support program. So everybody was having to refile and get all their stuff done. The October 1st deadline, that wasn't my deadline. That was their deadline.
Right.
They just framed it like it was mine. So the whole fact that it takes a tweet. Otherwise, I would have had to reapply. It was going to take 2 weeks just to process the initial paperwork. And they even told me, they're like, "Yeah, it'll take 10 to 14 business days to process the reapplication." I'm like, "By then it will be October 8th." And they were like, "Well, yeah, you're just going to miss out on this stuff." I'm like, "Because you fucked up." What? Why am I being punished because you didn't do your job? And there are people who have dealt with that.
Yeah.
What are we doing when we're sustaining a 2 decades long war on now 3 fronts, but we can't take care of the soldiers and the sailors, airmen, Marines, whatever on the back end? That's People think that, war is all about what happens while you're there. It's not. You have to sustain what happens to your country and its people afterward too. And we don't plan for that because we never think about that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to. It's scary.
What would you suggest? Because it's a completely nonpartisan issue. When you look at polls, you can't get a poll in America that 90% of people agree on, but they can agree on they want to take care of veterans.
Yeah.
And so there's obviously a demand that people want this fixed.
Mm-hmm.
What can if someone's listening right now, like what would you suggest they do? Is it call your congressman? Is it
Oh
what
God.
I, I don't know if I have a lot of faith in that, but what
Yeah, I was
steps
going to
can
say I would love to say that that's the
right,
issue,
right.
but well, the election's over, so maybe in another couple of years when they give a shit again.
Yeah, exactly. We'll try again and nothing
Yeah,
happened.
I would love to say, like, I'm sorry, I'm a libertarian. I don't
I
have a lot of faith in our
yeah.
government,
Yeah.
any government really.
I wanted to ask you about that actually, because when I see another, it's like when two dogs pass and they get excited. When I see another libertarian, I have to ask them about it because right, it's not like oh for most people, for 99% people who are libertarians, it's not like oh my dad was a libertarian, so I'm a libertarian. You don't you
Yeah.
had to actively seek it out. So how
Mhm.
did you find libertarianism?
I actually didn't know it existed. I mean, I knew about like the Tea Party and everything as a
Right,
kid, but in my head, growing up, my parents always acted like a third party was just like, it's a wasted vote. And I don't know
right,
why they're doing that. And even though I never really believed that because I always had it's a real sturdy moral compass. I don't feel like you should ever you should never have to sacrifice your morals to do what you think is right, because if they're your morals, it will be what's right. Um, so when, growing up, my family was Republican, except for during the Clinton administration. I think both my parents voted for Bill Clinton. But then after that, I mean, so many people voted Republican, and then 9/11, and it Republicans seemed like the ones who supported the military the most.
Right.
So I thought I was Republican for the longest time. I didn't realize that, thinking that gay rights are just human rights, or that the pot laws are fucking ridiculous, or that personal freedom should trump, government mandates. I didn't realize that all of that was libertarianism. I thought it was being a Republican. I thought it was just being a person. Um, like the way I see it, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you're a citizen of America who whatever other consenting adult you love, it's none of anybody's fucking business. If you smoke pot, if you do drugs, whatever, it's your body. I don't give a shit. That's you. You want guns? Fine. Do it on your private property. You should probably take some safety courses and know exactly what you're handling. And yeah, it should be regulated to a point. I don't think everybody needs a fucking tank. I didn't realize that all of that's more of a democratic view, except for the guns thing. But I didn't realize that I was so middle of the road in between both of them until I got out, and I was actually in a sociology class, and they made us take a political spectrum test.
Yep.
And I was like, oh shit. And I started looking, and it was like, I'm a libertarian. I had no idea. I'm one of those crackpot third party people.
Yeah. One of those crazies.
Yeah. And it's very much like I want to protect America. That doesn't mean I trust my government. I don't trust most politicians. I think most of them are out for their own personal interests, and they will frame whatever they have to in whatever way they need to get your vote, because it's what's best for them. Like, it's all a power struggle. And I honestly think the bipartisan system is destroying our country. It's creating this vast schism that we have no hope of sewing shut until we start to realize that there's a fuckload of people in the middle. And maybe, I don't know, work together as Americans instead of just Democrats or Republicans and acting like we're the enemy of each other. These people calling for civil war out of their fucking minds. And almost all of them have never been to war.
Yep.
They don't know what they're asking. They don't understand that they're asking people to die for disagreeing with them. They don't understand they're asking their countrymen to kill each other because they disagree. They don't understand that the level of collateral damage will destroy the country. Children, families, the elderly, no one would be safe in a civil war. Entire cities would be destroyed. And then who does the military support? Do you think it's you? It's not. The military supports the government. Like, whatever these people think is going to happen in their rosy idea of a fucking civil war is not what would really happen. People will die. That's not acceptable. Just because they disagree with you, you don't get much more un-American than that.
That's what's so frustrating is you hear civil war and people throw that out there, and I've talked to people who are professional, put together people who are like, yeah, maybe we just need a civil war. And
you know what? Alien invasion. I'll take that.
Right. Do you hear the words? Have you read a second of history? Have you talked to a single person who has actually been in a war? Can you comprehend what you're actually saying and the destruction that would cause? And it's for people to be so flippant about it. And I get it. They kind of just throw it out there as, oh yeah, civil war. But to actually understand what you have to say those words, you have to put some thought behind them.
Right. And I think it's a symptom of our country being in a dual decade long war.
Yeah, that's true.
Where people they're desensitized to it.
Yeah.
Oh, war is just an everyday fact of life now. Whereas, we were kids growing up, war wasn't a thing.
Right.
We've got kids nowadays that are like joining the war. They weren't even born when it started.
Yeah.
All our country is known
in
2 decades is war. and people act like because they don't see it, it won't
Exactly.
be as bad as it is because we
Exactly.
kept the war somewhere else. They haven't felt it here,
That's
and they act
exactly
like
what it
it's an
is.
answer, and it's not.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what it is. Is they say, "Oh, we're at war right now," and my life's fine. So that's what they associate war with. It's just like, yeah, some things happen somewhere else, and
Yeah, it'll be
I
somewhere else. Like, are you going to be
right,
boots on the ground? Because I doubt it.
right, exactly.
Like,
So let's end on a high note. I have to ask you about Range 15 because I love that
okay.
movie. If for people who haven't seen it, it's as long as you're not sensitive in any way,
Oh yeah.
it's a movie that does not get made anymore. Like they used to
Oh yeah.
when I was growing up, you had and I don't know if anything rose to love Range 15, but like they were making
Oh,
movies like
Blazing
Super
Saddles,
Bad.
I think.
Say that again.
When we were growing up, Blazing Saddles, I think
Blazing
still
Saddles.
today, there's no way Blazing Saddles will get made,
Exactly.
but it's so iconic.
Yeah, so
Like,
there's so many movies that I watch now that 15 years ago, it wasn't like it was that long ago that they were made,
yeah.
but I'm like,
Oh,
there's no
people are
way they're
getting
making that
canceled
now.
for it today because they were
Exactly.
in it then. Like, are you kidding
Exactly.
me?
Exactly. So Range 15 it was a breath of fresh air to watch that movie. I loved it. How did you get hooked up with those guys and get involved?
Okay, so it all started with Jared Taylor. At the time, he, Matt Best, Vincent Vargas, and I think to a point Evan Hafer, and Cody. Uh, I can never say his last name right. Siaza. Um, they had started Article 15, which was a t-shirt company, and they were, they had been doing the YouTube videos and everything. It was, I knew who they were and it was funny. And so I'd followed them on Facebook. When they put out this video, it was like, hey, we've come up with a mystery t-shirt. And Matt was like, I have personally vetoed this design like 3 times. It's that bad. I don't think we should make it, but I lost a bet. So we're making it. And I was like, all right. And I ordered 10 of them and like all different sizes. Cause I was like, yep, I'm pretty certain my friends and I will rock these. And so I ordered 10 of them, and JT messages me. He's like, hey, you ordered 10 of these shirts? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, it's a it's a pretty bad design. It's really offensive. I'm like, I'm hoping that. That's what I'm banking on. And he's like, are you serious? And apparently he went to my profile and on Facebook, and my profile picture was me in the Ranger Up shirt. That's the T-Rex throwing the hand grenade, and it says T-Rex hates hand grenades. And
Right.
he was like, okay, you have to film yourself opening it. I'm like, okay. And so we open it, and it was the Meat Pony shirt, which is a shirt with a horse like rearing on its hind legs, and it has a massive erection, but it's just a silhouette. And so when you look at it, it almost just looks like a horse that's like reared back until you realize that one of those legs is a massive cock. So a bunch of us wore it, and they were like, oh, JT and I just started talking after that. And we did a couple Skype calls. Turns out he was in the reserves, the National Guard for TAC P up here in Washington State was where I lived. And so he came up a couple times. We, went out, went drinking, got shit house together, realized we're all really fucked on the same level. And like we get along really well in the same dark sense of humor.
Right.
Um, and so we became fast friends, and they started telling me about they wanted to make this movie and everything. And then I told JT, like, he'd been around, and he's like, so what happens when this happens? Because he was there one day when my husband tossed something to me, and I caught it. I'm like, all right, I got it, and I set it down, and he's like mouth drops open. I'm like, what? He's like, you caught that? I'm like, yeah. I mean, sometimes I fuck with him and I let it hit me in the chest, and I'm like, really, dude? You tossed something to me, the armless woman? like that's just because I have this bone in my body. It makes me really, really like messing with people.
Yeah.
I'm just a serial prankster. So little things like that, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get that joke in today. And so they were doing the script, and JT calls me, and he's like, Mary, you're gonna be in the movie. I'm like, I haven't acted since like a third grade Christmas play, right? And he's like, it'll be fine. You're just playing yourself. I'm like, okay. He's like, you're gonna be the general's daughter. I'm like, my daddy's not a general. He's like, well, he is now. I'm like, okay. So what happens? And then he's like, well, he like sends me a tentative script, and it changed a few times. But he's like, there's going to be a sex scene with you and Matt, because Matt's just a man whore in this movie. And the way they pitched it to me is they were like, we want it to be a military movie that's not just about, coming home and being PTSD riddled or being broken and sad and depressed, because that tends to be a major focus in most military movies, is how
Right.
brutal it is. And yeah, it's fucking brutal, but not all of us deal with it the same way. And they tend to really gloss over the dark humor. Like, you'll have one or two lines that make you giggle in every military movie, but for the most part, it's very serious. And we wanted to kind of break away, like, no, some of us are just, yeah, we've gone through the shit, but we're funny, and we deal with it with humor. We don't always deal with it with, just turning into rampant alcoholics who can't function, or completely closing ourselves off to the world. And all of us are actively trying to get people to not do that when they get out. We want guys to get out and transition well. And sure, now you can drink whenever, but maybe don't drink before noon on Monday. You know, you don't have to hide your pain from the war. Go talk to somebody, get help, and it's not taboo, and you can joke about it. Like, you have people online who, like, you like, I'll put up an amputee joke and they'll be like, that's insensitive. Like, you know what you're talking to. Like,
Right.
how would you let me worry about what I am sensitive to?
Right.
Like, but it just sounded like something we need as a culture, because the military very much is a culture that, civilians don't tend to understand on that level. And we were really hoping to bring some understanding of, like, this is why we have dark humor. This is why we deal with the shit we do. This is why we can go from middle of combat to laughing about something.
Yeah.
Like, you learn to compartmentalize this shit. And when you just try to explain it to somebody, they don't actually get it. But if you give them a visual, they start to, oh, okay, I see it. And that's how they framed it for me. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And then of course, they were like, oh, you're gonna have the sex scene with Matt. And I was legitimately like, how naked do I have to be? And they're like, well, I'm like, do I have to do like crunches and squats before we do this? And they're, no, you'll be behind a dumpster. Like, you don't even have to get undressed. I'm like, oh, okay. No, I'm okay. Oh, awesome. Can do. Can we do that scene first? Because I'm nervous. And I'm not kidding. I had to do a shot of Jameson before it, because I was shaking. I was so nervous.
Yeah.
And like, we're standing by the dumpster and Matt's behind me and he's got his hands on my hips because we're about to do it. And he's like, you're shaking. I'm like, I'm so fucking nervous. Like, you don't know, man. I don't even like having my picture taken. And now we're filming me. And I'm like, and
how was Matt? Matt, I'm sure Matt was fine.
Oh yeah, Matt was fine. Matt actually helped keep me calm during that scene. He's like, hey, it's okay, you got this. I'm like, all right. And Keith David played my dad, and so he's supposed to drive up and see me getting railed out behind the dumpster by Matt. And so, like, we're going through that, and then I have to be like, Daddy. And I'm like, the whole time I'm like, my dad can never watch this movie.
Right.
Like, I don't even want my dad's friends that I grew up with, all the other cops, to watch this movie. Like, I'm proud, but at the same time, Dad, no, you're not allowed. Mm-mm.
Right. Did he ever actually see it?
No.
Okay.
We're very much in the family. Like, my siblings have all seen it. My parents have not.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Mom, sure, she could, but I'm not
That's
gonna.
Funny. And I remember reading the reviews too, and your scenes were the ones that people like picked out as like being the most offensive. Yeah, and it was so funny because I'm like, I didn't know you, but I was like, I'm sure she had fun doing it. Like, she knew what. And I remember like people getting offended for you for doing those scenes, and that's
the key scene actually came from my life. It came from that moment where James had tossed something to me, and I caught it and set it down, and then JT's like, "What? Well, like." Oh my God, he caught it. I'm like, I don't always catch it. Like, sometimes I let it hit me in the chest. Like, really? And that's what birthed that scene, was that conversation. We filmed that scene for hours, and I did so many different like fucked up things, like putting the keys on my foot and trying to kick it to myself, and like rolling over onto my back, trying to drop it on my chest and get it. And like, we even had one where Matt threw it back, and I was wearing this necklace, and one of the keys like tangled in the necklace, so it hits me, and I'm like, what the stuff? And it's just like hanging on me, and I'm like, fuck. But it was never meant like it was never intended. The context of it is not to be offensive. It is to be so ridiculous as to remove the it's supposed to make you uncomfortable. It's supposed to desensitize you to it enough that you remove your facade of, oh my God, that's offensive, and go, she took part in this.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not like they held me down and made me pretend I can't pick up keys, you know? Like, I was very much into it. Like, and I was very much like, okay, like, do you need me to like make faces? Do you need me to sound frustrated? What do you need me to do? Like, I wanted to really sell it, you know, and I was more than willing to, because I wanted people to realize that we have a fucking sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
It's not all, oh, woe is me, I can't pick up keys. You know?
And I hope you guys understand like how powerful that movie was, because I remember working at the USO and I would tell vets about the movie because I saw it earlier because I knew Tom Amenta, and so like I knew about it really early on. So I was telling everyone I knew, I was telling everyone at the USO about it, and guys would go and watch it, and they would come back and they would be like, you know, quoting the movie and just tell me how much they like it. It did hit a nerve with vets. Like it let them laugh at that experience that they had in a way that no one else could make them laugh other than other vets. And so it was something special, and it was cool for me to be able to see it hit people in a way that they hadn't been hit. You know, guys who might have been feeling depressed, might have been feeling like nobody understood their situation. There was this movie that was made by them for them, and it was just so fucking hilarious in a way that nothing else has been in years.
I did have like, so I've seen the effects of it, you know, going out. So my husband was teaching at the EOD school for 3.5 years down in Florida in phase 2. And he was doing TMDs, which is tools and methods. There's one part where you do tape and line, and you have to essentially tie a rope to a piece of ordnance to remove it. And at one point you have to run. You tie the rope around whatever you're working on, and then you tie it around your waist and you run the opposite direction to remove it. And it's actually the standard method. But to make it a little bit more interesting, they're always like, all right, make your spirit animal call. And they had guys going, ooh,
right.
And one of them, they were talking about it in class one day, and James went in to go teach, and they're like, Sergeant Cribbett, have you seen Range 15? He's like, yeah, my wife's in it. And they're like, what? And they're like, the armless girl with the keys. They're like, that's your wife? He's like, yeah, I married her for the hand jobs.
Hey,
you get people like offended, but it's like, no, don't be offended. It's fun.
Right. I think that's a perfect way to end this, Mary. So, Mary Dague, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining.
I had a great time.
I'm not on Twitter much, but you are one of my favorite follows on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle for people who want to follow you?
Wonder Nubs.
Wonder Nubs, right. Anywhere else you want to direct anyone?
I guess you could follow us on Twitch too. My husband and I both stream for Drinking Bros Gaming.
Awesome.
I'm Wonder Nubs on there too. But...
Awesome. Excellent. All right, Mary, thank you so much. We'll have to do this again.
Awesome. Yes. Thanks, Aaron.